In cunning ways, the make-believe. Cunning ways, the shade. Flesh and spirit, you can use wicked hearts. This society will always be as a drunken of the wine. Controlling all the senses for understanding great divine. I will send fire to this land.
All right, peace and blessings. This is your brother Gabar, and this is Man Going God's Way. Shalom, peace and blessings. Thank you for joining us. You could have been anywhere else, but you're here with me. My trusted colleague, Brother Anwan. How we doing, sir?
Hey, Shalom, Elder. I'm doing well. How you doing?
I'm great. I'm I'm kind of excited about today's conversation.
Yes, sir.
But before we start, I just wanted to make sure, are we coming in clear? Just give us a thumbs up, loud and clear. Some of the brothers, I see brother there, Zedekiah, he's out there. Peace, brother. We're probably going to meet next week. I'm glad you're doing well. So give us just a thumbs up and make sure you hit the like and subscribe so we get the algorithm going. I just want to make sure we get at least one thumbs up, or in regards, are we coming in clear? You know what I could also check clear. Okay, yeah, we're good. Okay, I checked on my end. All right. So let's get started. So let's kind of, set the stage, right? I think we should set the stage for the audience before we start.
Okay.
So make sure you guys come in because, sometimes people come in much later. That's why you should always get your notification bell on to make sure you get a notification from YouTube that I'm coming live, so you can start from the beginning, those that, usually come in every week. Mm-hmm. And so let me start from the beginning while we're having this conversation. And the title of this lesson or this class or this conversation, the history of the 12 apostles with a question mark. The history of the 12 apostles. And the reason why I dubbed it that title is because there was a document I came across about 2 months ago, month and a half ago, when I did the lesson, the apostolic succession. And I sat on it because I didn't know too much about it, so I did a little research. You and I were talking last night, and going into the this document. Now, for the record, I just want to say that this document is a fairly new document. I think it goes back to the 1930s. And when I looked at it 2 months ago, or whenever I first saw it, I left it alone because I didn't know too much about it. I picked it up again early this week. And then basically what it is, to kind of give a long story, long story short, there was a doctor, I believe a psychiatrist, in the 1930s. I got to get his name. It's all in the section in the website. That was, I guess, treating a patient or someone he knew. And this person, who is anonymous, nobody knows who this person is, claimed that he received some revelations from God. And the name of the organization, or the name of the book, what is the name of the book?
URANTIA.
The URANTIA book, the URANTIA, if I'm pronouncing that right?
URANTIA.
URANTIA book, right? Let me put the, matter of fact, let me do this. Let me see if I could do something real quick. Bear with me, folks. Where is this book that I put? Okay, is it? I think this is, yeah, right here. Okay, very good. Okay, so let me put it to the audience, for the audience could be able to see it. So this is the website here. What I'm going to do also, I'm going to, where are you? Okay, television. There you go. I'm going to put the link below so you guys can look at it yourself. So basically, this book, the URANTIA book, is a book that the anonymous person, right, the anonymous patient, if you will, of this doctor, claimed that he got this revelation from God. And then the doctor took it to some experts, analyzed it, and I think, in Brother Arwan, I think from your research, there were some critics that said that it was probably some plagiarized work within, or more ancient work within these writings.
Yeah, at various ancient works. So there's been some use of some older sources without the author of this book actually citing those works. He didn't attribute it to anybody. He just wrote it. He just wrote it down. So there were a few scholars that searched throughout the text, and they found many points where he had taken accounts or records on some of the scientific works within the URANTIA book, different equations that he had taken from older books. However, I was unable to find any work, any attributed works of old that will actually be going into today on that particular page.
Yeah.
But the idea is not foreign, and I'm sure you'll get into why we're going into the book. But
because when you look into the book, and when I was reading it, it's online. You could get the URANTIA book, The Life and Teachings of Jesus, paper 139. And this is specifically dealing with the 12 apostles, and I put the link in the comment section. Right. And when I was reading it, it's like some of this information I read somewhere. Like it sounds familiar. And I went down below and to try to find the sources. And you're right, there was none. I contact a representative of this website, Jeff, shout out to him. I might bring him on the show in the future, maybe a Tuesday or Thursday. We'll see about that. Because he did send me some stuff They have to scan through. But the followers of this book, to be transparent, they believe that this anonymous person was received divine information, and they kind of started an organization. It's a nonprofit organization, a church or and they have a YouTube channel. You just look it up and so forth, so on. So the best way to describe it is a book or a religion that is closely to, not closely, but the same similar story of Mormonism, right? With the Book of Mormon, that someone claimed I got divine intervention. I don't believe that. However, though, I am very curious where this person got this source from. He's claiming, well, he's not here anymore, but the persons that are defending his belief that he was divinely inspired are defending that argument, right?
Right.
As you know, the Bible said there will be no more prophecies coming after the fact, after Christ. You know, in Hebrews 1:1, in ancient time he spoke to us through the prophets, but now he talked to us through Christ, his son. Mm-hmm. You know, right. When Christ completed his work, it is finished. Christ did not prophesy any new prophet coming in after him. He did, predicted or prophesied about the Holy Spirit coming in the day of Pentecost, which was fulfilled. Other than that, there was no new prophets coming in. So I don't accept this man to be a prophet. I just want to be clear. I don't know if Brother Jets is listening. But in the same way as the Quran is a book that I don't accept as being divine, we could agree that the persons that put the book together were not idiots, were not, novice. These people, took books and records. I believe when I read the Quran, I saw a little bit of the Jubilee there. I saw a little quotes from the book of Josh, a little history, especially what happened to Pharaoh after. Because in the book of Jasher, he didn't die, right? In the Bible, it's not clear. It says that the Pharaoh, they all died in the sea. But in the book of Jasher, it said Pharaoh was the only one that was left, and he looked down and he finally admitted that God, the God of the Hebrews, is the true God. And I believe in the book of Jasher, he converted or accepted. It's been a while since I read it. I could be wrong. Please don't call me. Anybody who's familiar with the book of Jasher, it's been a while. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to take I got some vacation time coming from work. I got to see what I want to probably take a week off and just reread a lot of these books, Jubilee, Jasher, of course, the Bible, the Apocrypha, just because you remember more, you forget more than you remember after a while. So you have to just get yourself freshened up. But maybe we can do all that together as men going God's way, and then put an archives of things that we maybe discover. Because every time you read the Bible, you find new Jews, right? New discovery.
Yes, sir.
So in the Quran, although we don't accept the Quran, we could clearly see, okay, scholarly people put this together. Even in the Book of Mormon, you could show that it goes into some scholarly work, specifically when Morana, I forgot the guy's character's name, that I believe, according to their narrative, he left, and his family, a tribe of Ephraim, left during the conquest of, I believe, I thought it was the Babylonian, but it was actually the Assyrian empire. And I could be wrong, so don't call me if anybody knows that history. But they mention some historical names and goes into it. So it was not somebody who was not familiar with the biblical narrative, right?
Right.
You also have, other, I'm trying to see other writings. Like a good example, in the book of Josephus, right? He doesn't claim to be a divine prophet or receive this information, but because of his scholarship, we were able to lean on a lot of his history to try to unpack our history, right?
Right.
So the reason why I'm saying is that Okay. This book, and this book reminds me of similar to the doctrine of the 12.
Mm.
That was more the guy who came out was a vegetarian. He didn't eat meat, and he
Right.
inserted. But the legend is, or the accusation, or his credit says that he was a Catholic monk. He he had access to the books that the Roman Catholic Church had been collected and not sharing with the world.
Right.
Right. And so he took information there and he kind of added his whole vegetarian belief in those records. However, though, outside of the vegetarian stuff, I think that's one of the few books, I don't know, or the only book, but clearly if it's more than one, it's a few, that said that Joseph lay with Mary. Right? So, and we all know that that's something that we believe in. We believe that the Roman Catholic Church have had control of these records for thousands of years. If you was caught with any of these records, you would be put to death. That was the whole William Tyndale, why King James was fighting against the Roman Catholic Church. Yeah, the Bible, he wanted it to be spread across the land and not have the Roman Catholic Church control the records and only have the records, but also you have to go to them to get the narrative, right, of the Bible. He wanted to kind of let every man read for themselves. And that started with William Tyndale. And that there was another, you got the Spanish Bible, the Reina Verena, is the King James version of the Bible. I forgot the guy's name, but he also got killed by the Roman Catholic Church. And they did the same thing to him that they did with King James. They accused him of being a homosexual and this, and it looks like the Roman Catholic Church was doing propaganda and mind control even back then, right? So I'm saying that to say this is that this book kind of reminds me of that. Do I believe it's legit? No, but do I believe that the people that got put together, and many scholars who are critics of this book said that this is some copyright work, right? Now we're going to try to find those copyright works and maybe do a part 2 in the future, but let's dive into it. And the reason why I wanted to dive in the beginning, I wanted to kind of do a part 2 of the apostolic succession. And then you and I were just like, we were talking last night. I thought maybe a better name would be the history of the 12 apostles with a question mark. Is there something here, although there's a later work, biblical scholar says there is some plagiarized sections here. We need to do more dive. Maybe I could bring in one of these scholars that criticized this book and he or she could maybe point out where is the plagiarism at. But a lot of the plagiarism, I point out certain parts outside of this, especially with Andrew. You got, when you look at the early church fathers quotes about Andrew, there's a lot of stuff that we could find here. Andrew was more an administrator. Peter, to use a modern term, was more like a hawhead. And there's some writings on that first he was like, someone that his faith needs to be developed. He was more like a talker, let's go. But he had his weak points when it came down to faith in certain key areas. So I want to read this today and have a discussion, because the reason why I did the apostolic succession is because I truly believe that what is missing with it in churches is a council. That bishops could run their own church, but I think there has to be part of a much body council. Right. And I think when you have one person in charge, it could get dangerous. And I believe that is exactly and precisely why the Roman Catholic Church, you could find the term Pope before the official Pope. And I didn't know this until recently, that the concept as we know the Pope today, of being the supreme leader, infallible, and the vicar of Christ, and we're going to go into these names as well. And I think you sent me some stuff, and then I'm going to probably send to me because I want to also show the folks. I think what was it you sent me? I think you sent me in the apocrypha in the Wikipedia dealing with that term going back to 1870, right? And 1870 is pretty recently. The Vicar of Christ. We and when you look at even in the story of the Borgiers, right? When you look at the Borgiers, which is the father of Borgier was Alexander something, Rodriguez Borgier. What was his father's name? Borgier, Alexander Borgier, I think his father's name. I forget. I know César Borgier was the son. The father was the Pope. But when you look at the Pope at that time, the Pope did not have full power like he had now, that he has now, or that power that was granted to him in 1870. Excuse me, 1870. So it was a gradual thing. It was like a power grab because at that time the Borgier, they were bribing the bishops to vote on or threaten some of the bishops. So that goes to show you that at the time of the Borgiers, they did not have, the Pope did not have this Vicar of Christ. There you go. Gee, I got scholars. Shout out to Sadakaya. Pope Alexander VI was the father of Caesar Borgia. There you go. I'm getting old, so you gotta forgive me. Sometimes I forget more than I can remember these days, right? So, and the term Pope was a term you could find in early Christendom in certain regions, but it was like the head bishop. But it was quoted as he was the first of equals. The first of equals is a term that means that all the bishops are equal, but he's the first. He's like the spokesperson. He's the most senior, so they lean upon him. And I don't know I think you're mute. I don't know if that's in my end.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I said Rodrigo. I was wondering.
Yeah.
But did he say it was Pope Alexander? Okay.
Yeah, Pope Alexander the Sixth was father. Yeah, he was Pope Alexander the Sixth.
Okay.
But that Alexander the Sixth usually means he named himself after the fifth, and the fifth after the fourth, and the fourth after the third, and the second and first. So there's probably was some guy, maybe Alexander. I know there was a bishop in Egypt called Bishop Alexander, I believe.
Yeah, so Rodrigo Borgia is the same. Yeah, he later Pope Alexander VI. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So
Rodriguez, right, Rodrigo, right, exactly. Now, so we're gonna read some of this, right, information. I think let me adjust this real quick. So let's read this information a little bit, and then we could maybe comment a little bit. So basically, the introduction, and then it got the history of all the apostles. We're not gonna read all of them, because it's gonna take a little time. But we're gonna probably deal with Andrew, Simon. I like Thomas. I like Matthews. So we and I think you want to touch also on Judas because it goes into some things there that perhaps it may be of interest to us, right? So,
yes, sir. And can I mention one thing before we start reading?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and so you can probably you'll know more on the topic than me, but a lot of the texts as far as that we use that are extra canonical, even Jasher and Jubilee, one could argue, we choose to accept those books because they don't meet the same standard as the canon or the Apocrypha,
Yeah.
because there is no chain of custody. So even I
Yeah.
believe the book of Jasher being compiled of oral records,
Yes.
but we read and we accept the books based on their own merit. And this
Right.
goes back to the early church fathers, because there used to be disputes about the book of Enoch then,
Yeah.
because you don't know it, we can't find an exact origin connected to the time and the person. But as you read the text, like, different scriptures, if they speak not according to the law and to the testimony, there's no truth in them. But we can find things of value that do correlate with what we know,
Yeah.
and then we accept a little more if it goes along with what we've already read.
Exactly.
You brought out some sources like in the early church fathers when they spoke of the different apostles, as well as I've read some of these things as well, but I haven't seen it in a collective body of work. So just
Yeah.
based on its own merit, it doesn't mean we read every New Testament extra canonical book. So it's
Yeah.
not that we're going to go into hundreds of different books just because it's a name and, hey, elder, what do you think about this?
Yeah.
No, this book has some validity, at least these records, right? We do assume that it is plagiarized. You brought out an interesting point yesterday where I started looking, is that there's the potential that whatever records this comes from is not in English,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Because what people need to understand is that most of the records that we keep today or has been translated today into English were either Hebrew or Greek, mostly Greek, right? I think they found fragments of the Matthew Bible or the Matthew epistle or gospel in Hebrew, but there's a lot more copies in the Greek. Now, the danger of that is that you limited yourself of all the other languages that the books and the records was translated. That's why the Holy Spirit came upon the church on the day of Pentecost, and they would begin to speak in different languages. So I would assume that if they began to speak in different languages, they also knew how to write, read, and translate the writings from the Hebrew into those different languages, right? Or people that they began to understand, many of them, they became apostles. So, became disciples, because I think in the day of Pentecost, they baptized 3,000 people. So, and they were devout Jews from every nation, right? And they were speaking in different languages. So I would assume that the apostle began to preach the gospel in their languages. And I'm pretty sure some of those men that became a letter of deacons and then bishop began to scribe in the teachings in their language. So you have records of the gospel and the history of the apostles in all the language, in many languages: Syriac, Ethiopic, Aramaic, Slavic, which is the Russian language. And we all know that the Eastern Orthodox Church in Russia, they kept all the imagery of the apostles with dark skin, right? The Russian icon, that's what we all lean on, right? In regards to prove that Christ and all these prophets were people of color. But in the Western side, which is Rome, what happened is that it wasn't necessarily that the Romans wanted to hide the fact that the Jews were black or people of color. And I'm not, I don't want to use that word black anymore, because I think, it's a spell, the term black, when you look historically, it's associated with black magic, but also we're not black, we're brown, we're earth. We come from the earth, right? Your hair is black and your skin is brown, right? So it wasn't that they wanted to hide that, although there's an argument for that, and I believe there's a valid one. But I believe that when you look at the history or the culture of the Romans, any god they used to worship, it doesn't matter if this god comes from the Middle East, it comes from China, it comes from Africa, it comes from Syriac, from Babylon, they used to transform those gods to look like them. So that culture continued with when they converted to Christianity.
Mm.
That's that makes sense?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
So, regardless, the same result happened. People, now are brainwashed to think that all the characters of the Bible were white. But when you go into the Ethiopic church, you got the disciples looking like them. When you got you got the Eastern Orthodox Church, which are Russian. So that culture was not a culture that all Europeans kept, right? People in Europe. People question whether who really ran the Eastern Orthodox Church. This issue, or there's history there that talks about maybe perhaps these were also Danites. I heard that. I heard Phoenician as well. Many group there were Phoenician that converted to Christianity.
Mm.
And I also heard that they were Israelites as well. So there's different arguments. I don't believe they were Israelite necessarily, but there's an argument there for that. But nevertheless, we are now in a situation that we're trying to pick up the pieces, and I thought that this particular writing is interesting to read because it gives us certain things, and experts have said there's some plagiarized work here of much older documents. We're going to go into that, and we really don't know where this guy got his source from. They're claiming it was divine. We don't believe that. I don't believe that, but let's have a conversation. So let's start with Andrew, the first of the apostle, who is the brother of Peter, right? So we could start there.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna pull it up. I didn't know if we were going. All right. So I have it here. Okay. Andrew, the first chosen. Andrew, chairman of the apostolic corps of the kingdom, was born in Capernaum. He was the oldest child in a family of 5, himself, his brother Simon, and 3 sisters. His father, now dead, had been a partner of Zebedee in the fish drying business in Bethsaida, the fishing harbor of Capernaum. When he became an apostle, Andrew was unmarried, but made his home with his married brother, Simon Peter. Both were fishermen and partners of James and John, the sons of Zebedee.
Okay,
In AD.
So all that is pretty accurate. There's nothing there that is wrong.
Right.
Peter is recorded to be he was married. Peter was married. Andrew was considered to be the older brother, and Peter had, I believe, 4 children, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. Okay, so all that is correct. So let's go into the second paragraph, and we're gonna jump down, but I want you to set the stage.
Okay, do you think the introduction, we skipped that? I think there was some good information in that. Did you want to touch that?
If you want to do that, yeah, let's do that. So let's go to the introduction, which is on top, right?
Yep, and I'll just start in the second paragraph.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. Okay. All right. So the apostles learned from the Messiah about the kingdom of heaven, and the Messiah learned much from them about the kingdom of men, human nature as it lives on earth and on the other evolutionary worlds of time and space. These 12 men represented many different types of human temperament, as they had not been made alike by schooling. Many of these Galilean fishermen carried heavy strains of Gentile blood as a result of the forcible conversion of the Gentile population of Galilee 100 years previously.
Now I looked into that. There was a Gentiles converting. That was normal, and that's why these Israelites that are out there that are racist need to understand that Israelite were a people and they had a religion. The world called Judaism, or Judean culture, or the God of Abraham, whatever you want to term it. It was also a religion. So you had converts in Israel since ancient time. right? So we need to address that. These people not were all of them were not Israelite returning back to their culture, as a lot of these Israelites try to claim. Some of them were, but a lot of them also were Gentiles, right? Now,
Okay.
the mix, the mix of blood, we don't know. I believe that's
Yeah.
probably speculation on this
Yeah.
guy's behalf, but it's an introduction.
Right. And in many of the accounts of them, there some of the disciples were even described as some more racist than others. Like some
Yeah,
couldn't even comprehend the idea of an international thing, which goes on to the account, which could also substantiate this being from older records, because the introduction is written by them,
yeah,
and then they say heavy strands of Gentile, but we know there was a dispute with Paul and Peter because some of them weren't readily accepting of
right.
Gentiles as much as the others. And we'll read about that later on in some of these accounts, which ones were and which ones weren't.
Exactly. So it could have probably been that the full-blooded Israelites were more nationalistic thinking, because even with Cornelius, remember when Peter went back to the elders, he said, and they're content with him,
Mm,
and say,
mm-hmm,
why have you gone to uncircumcised men, I mean
mm-hmm,
Gentiles?
right, right.
And Cornelius was a proselyte, so they didn't even accept proselytes.
Mm-hmm,
So there was
right.
you could tell that there was a still a racial component to it, to the point that they were Zelot, and you got one of the apostles was named Simon the Zelite.
Right. Yes, sir.
And I think in this it touched on that as well,
Right,
that he
right.
was very nationalistic driven, right? So let's continue.
Yeah. Okay. And so this is the point that I really wanted to get to. Okay. So it says, do not make the mistake of regarding the apostles as being altogether ignorant and unlearned. All of them, except the Alphaeus twins, were graduates of the synagogue schools, having been thoroughly trained in the Hebrew scriptures and in much of the current knowledge of that day. 7 were graduates of the Capernaum synagogue schools, and there were no better Jewish schools in all Galilee. When your records refer to these messengers of the kingdom as being ignorant and unlearned, it was intended to convey the idea that they were laymen, unlearned in the lore of the rabbis, and untrained in the methods of rabbinical interpretation of the scriptures. They were lacking in so-called higher education. In modern times, they would certainly be considered uneducated, and in some circles of society, even uncultured. One thing is certain, they had not all been put through the same rigid and stereotyped educational curriculum. From adolescence on, they had enjoyed separate experiences of learning how to live.
Exactly. So, and has been verified by sources. Is correct. A lot, a typical Jew or Judean in Israel at that time went to rabbinical school, learned the basics, the history. It was more designed for it was a spiritual schooling, but it was also a nationalistic, giving national pride, to every Jew, right, at that time, to remind them of the struggle of the Israelites, and more importantly, remind them that they're not free 100%, because the promise of the Messiah and the restoration of Israel was common in the average Jew during the time of Christ, right? So they were not, ignorant to that point. They knew their history well. They knew, similar to like you and I, or someone who is, waking up to his understanding will probably take, like in GOCC, the academy. There's I know other groups that have type of lessons and private classes that they would give out.
Mm-hmm.
And you take the class, and after that you have a general understanding of the Torah and the history of the Bible, but you would not be considered an expert, right? So this is, so far it's correct, and I'm glad that you remind me of the introduction, because it kind of lay out the groundwork. So let's continue with
Andrew.
Andrew.
Okay.
And where we want to pick it up. She was
Second Second paragraph.
Not this. Let's see. What is it? In 70 AD. I mean AD
Well,
26.
yeah, AD 26. Yeah.
Yeah, we could pick it up there.
Okay. Okay. In AD 26, the year he was chosen as an apostle, Andrew was 33, a full year older than the Messiah and the oldest of the apostles.
Now
He sprang from.
this has not been confirmed.
Okay.
This has not been confirmed. How old was Andrew? People speculate. The oldest was like 30, 32, 31. But the way they kind of calculated is they kind of point the year that they died, and maybe how old were they when they died. And there's different sources that gives different ages. So scholars kind of come to the conclusion through, okay, this is our best guess, if that makes sense. Could he be 33? Possibly. He was the older brother of Peter. Peter had 4 children. Granted, people used to get married earlier back then, but having 4 children, a wife, you could probably at least, he was in his late 20s, early 30s, and Andrew was the older brother. So I just wanted to be fair, because this document, although it took a lot of information from history, some of it hasn't been confirmed. But go ahead, brother.
Right. Okay. He sprang from an excellent line of ancestors and was the ablest men of the 12, excepting oratory. He was the peer of his associates in almost every imaginable ability. The Messiah never gave Andrew a nickname, a fraternal designation, but even as the apostles soon began to call the Messiah master, so they also designated Andrew by a term, the equivalent of chief. Andrew was a good organizer, but a better administrator. He was one of the inner circle of 4 apostles, but his appointment by the Messiah as the head of the apostolic group made it necessary for him to remain on duty with his brethren, while the other 3 enjoyed very close communion with the master. To the very end, Andrew remained dean of the apostolic corps. Although Andrew was never an effective preacher, he was an efficient personal worker, being the pioneer missionary of the kingdom, and that as the first chosen apostle, he immediately brought to the Messiah his brother, Simon, who subsequently became one of the greatest preachers of the kingdom. Andrew was the chief supporter of the Messiah's policy of utilizing the program of personal work as a means of training the 12 as messengers of the kingdom. Whether the Messiah taught the apostles or preached to the multitude, Andrew was usually conversant with what was going on. He was an understanding executive and an efficient administrator. He rendered a prompt decision on every matter brought to his notice, unless he deemed the problem one beyond the domain of his authority, in which event he would take it straight to the Messiah. Andrew and Peter were unlike in character and temperament, but it must be recorded everlastingly to their credit that they got along together splendidly. Andrew was never jealous of Peter's oratorical ability. Not often will an older man of Andrew's type be observed exerting such a profound influence over a younger and talented brother. Andrew and Peter never seemed to be in the least jealous of each other's abilities or achievements. Late on the evening of the day of Pentecost, when largely through the energetic and inspiring preaching of Peter, 2,000 souls were added to the kingdom, Andrew said to his brother, "I could not do that, but I am glad I have a brother who could." To which Peter replied, "And but for your bringing me to the master, and by your steadfastness keeping me with him, I should not have been here to do this." Andrew and Peter were the exceptions to the rule, proving that even brothers can live together peaceably and work together effectively.
Right.
After Pentecost.
So they were like the original Andrew Tate and Tristan State, right? Right.
Yeah.
But there is some secular history or some extra biblical history that credits Andrew for being a good administrator. So I believe that's where he got this from, and the fact that he was the older of the 2, and he allowed Peter to take the front stage in regards of the preaching. And he was more like behind the scenes, an administrator. That goes to show you that they were both aware and comfortable in their skin, and both knew their strength and their weaknesses.
Right.
Right. And to going back to the conversation that was mentioned earlier about, setting up a church and having a committee, a council of men, keeping each other in balance, because Peter gave credit in this narrative to Andrew, keeping him in line when he was with Christ and so forth, so on. So, anything you want to add, or you saw that, something you saw that you thought it popped out?
Yes. Yeah. Can I just read these next two sentences, and
Please.
then I'll say my point?
Yeah. Because
Okay.
this is one of the longest of the so yeah, I want to get through it because it set the stage. So where are you?
Okay.
You in paragraph after the Pentecost? Is that one, or no? Wait.
Yeah, I'm right there after
Yeah.
Pentecost.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So it says after Pentecost, Peter was famous, but it never irritated the older Andrew to spend the rest of his life being introduced as Simon Peter's brother. Of all the apostles, Andrew was the best judge of men. He knew that trouble was brewing in the heart of Judas Iscariot, even when none of the others suspected that anything was wrong with their treasurer, but he told none of them his fears. So, well, I'll finish this paragraph and then I would like to make my point. Okay. So he said, but he told none of them his fears. Andrew's great service to the kingdom was in advising Peter, James, and John concerning the choice of the first missionaries who were sent out to proclaim the gospel, and also in counseling these early leaders about the organization of the administrative affairs of the kingdom. Andrew had a great gift for discovering the hidden resources and latent talents of young people. So we began today speaking about like papal supremacy. And so here we see Peter being the better orator of the two, and many records say of them all that he was a great teacher. But we still also see Peter saying to Andrew, thank you. He said, I wouldn't be able to do this had it not been for you keeping me with the master, keeping me with the Messiah. And we know in the scriptures that the Messiah told Peter, when thou art converted, and there's many arguments of what that means. When thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren, because we know now through different accounts that Peter, he denied the Messiah 3 times, when the sister seen him, and there was some adversity, but he still had a great gift of teaching. But we see here, Andrew was the best counselor and he was the best judge. So in the Western world, we know that our religion, as far as in the Judeo-Christian culture, that there's the idea that the greatest teacher, meaning having the skills of oratory, he must be the leader. Exactly. He must know the judgments. Exactly. He must know the counsels. But you see here, no, that's just one gift. But it isn't to be taken as, right, now I have some spiritual preeminence or connection to the Father, because as you'll see, and I mentioned it last week, and I hadn't read this text before, but I have a book called The Gospel According to the Hebrews. This is not book. It's a scholar, and he's going through with all the sources compiling what the gospel was to them, the Ebionite gospel. And he mentioned, but the records he got it from, because he would go to Greek scholars, that many of the apostles, I mentioned it last week, they didn't teach. That wasn't their thing. They dealt with, building the body, dealing with councils, different affairs to build the church and its treasury and spread the gospel. But then you had actual teachers, and we'll read about that. So the point here is that teaching is just still one gift, and it can't be taken to usurp everything, because as you'll see, in some ways, Peter was more deficient than all of them.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And that's the lesson that Christ was trying to teach them, because I think in their mind, they were already programmed to think, okay, one, Moses, one, King David, King Solomon, right? One prophet, Elijah, Samuel, all these one prophets. And yes, that is true. But even in the Old Testament, you got Obadiah. He, even back then, there were multiple prophets because he hit them. There were 100. And he put 50 in one cave and the other 50 in the other. So there is evidence throughout the scriptures and in other areas that shows that, yes, there were one individual that God chose, but in the New Testament, Christ was preparing the apostles to say, hey, this is a collective checks and balances system that I'm setting you up with. That's why he told them, let it be, when the disciples asked him, who will be greater among you? They said, let it be not found that will exercise lordship like the Gentiles, right? You will all be equal. So absolutely, I concur with everything you're saying. And the reason why I like this document, although I do believe it's plagiarized work, and when you plagiarize your work, you're trying to make it seem it's coming from your source or from you. So they had to hide that. However, though, I like it because the way they put it together is giving us. I could put myself in these writings. I could relate to these writings, and I like Andrew. I think I identify a lot with Andrew. I identify with Thomas too. We're going to read a little bit with Thomas, and I identify with Peter too. I mean, they all have gifts. They all have strength, but it's I like these conversations because we could see ourselves in it, and we could maybe explore, how can we move forward with this information, right? So
right. And one more point, elders. That's sure. Okay.
Please.
Okay. So and I was, when I was doing some reading about the papal supremacy, and I'm looking to try and find these sources that this could have been drawn from, and I'm seeing all you see is Peter, and I remember when Paul and Barnabas went and taught, because this says after Pentecost, Peter became famous, and so now we see you don't find many records that say Petros or Cepha means pebble. Right. It's all the rock, and it's all the idea. That's what papal supremacy sprung from. Right. But you remember Paul and Barnabas, because they knew it was the Gentiles thing to where they would deify any person of renown. So Paul literally rent his clothes. He rent his clothes. He's like, no, stop. Don't start doing that. I know what you want to do. No, all glory to the Most High. But I wonder if Peter, not purposely, but to some degree, the confusion sprung from that, because here it says after Pentecost, Peter was famous. So we know,
I'm sorry to interrupt. It's like Andrew Tate and Tristan Tate. Yeah. Andrew Tate is the most popular one, right? And Tristan is more the late guy who's working behind the scenes, protecting him, make sure security is right, and so forth, so on. But they're a team. Right. And you're right. Peter, he was the one. Peter came and he stood up, in the day of Pentecost, like, these men are not drunk because of the ninth hour of the day. And he began to preach the gospel, and then they all were pricked in the heart, and he said, what should we do to be saved? He said, be baptized in the name of the Son and receive the Holy Spirit. Right? So I could see how Peter became a rock star. Right. At that time.
Yeah, and it has to be some significance because Andrew was the first apostle. He brought Peter. So,
interesting. I never looked at it that way.
Yeah, he was the first one. Yeah. So there has to be some validity to it, because you would normally look like, okay, why did the Messiah call him first? He could have called Peter. So these things
and why would he call Andrew, who was not the best speaker, but he was the best administrator? That will say, okay, so that will show you that I'm just theorizing here, that
Mhm.
maybe Christ felt that, okay, that position is more important
Mm.
than preaching,
Mm.
right? Because when you look at a performance, right, the star gets all the credit, right? The
Mm.
singer, the actor, right?
Mhm.
But the
Mhm.
people is behind the scene, the writers, the light, the producers.
Mhm.
They're the one that creating the narrative to make this guy look the best.
Mm.
Say it this way, not that way.
Right.
Makeup, lights, everything, sound, right? Showtime, go. So
Mhm.
you're right. The administration or the people that are running the administration are the most important of any organization. If you don't have
Mhm.
those good foundation, you could have a superstar, you could have a rock star, a great singer, a great auditor, a great speaker. But if you don't have that order or that strict that wolf pack, if you will, that organization behind him making him look good, right? It wouldn't have the same impact.
Right.
So it's
Right.
interesting that Christ chose Andrew, who was more administrator, not really in the front. It speaks value to me.
Mhm.
It speaks value to me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes,
Anything else
sir.
you want to add, or you wanted to?
Oh, no. That's good. Yep. That's
Okay, so
good.
let's go back. Let's continue
Okay.
where we left off. Andrew was a man with clear insight. We went over that already.
No, we didn't go over that yet. There was a paragraph before it, but I was reading if it was anything of no, but we can start on that, his
Okay.
character. And
Yep. Because
okay. All right. So Andrew was a man of clear insight, logical thought, and firm decision, whose great strength of character consisted in his superb stability. His temperamental handicap was his lack of enthusiasm. He many times failed to encourage his associates by judicious commendation, as this reticence to praise the worthy accomplishments of his friends grew out of his abhorrence of flattery and insincerity. Andrew was one of those all round, even tempered, self made, and successful men of modest affairs. Mm.
okay.
That's heavy there because you could imagine not being he wasn't an emotional guy, so he wouldn't have been the greatest to teach. Even it says he had a reticence
Yeah.
to even praise people because he did not want to be seen as insincere or flattering. So he
Yeah.
was very stoic, and sometimes that would rub people the
The
wrong
wrong
way
way.
because he didn't show emotion.
Right.
You know, he
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
excitement, just like a logical computer like mine. Hey, we
Yeah.
need to do this. We
Yeah.
need to do that. Military commander
Yeah.
locked in.
Yeah. And the fact that his brother got married before him and he used to live with his younger brother
Wow.
could
That's heavy.
probably be that he was a little antisocial, maybe not really
Yeah,
the light of the party, more like
right.
a what's that word? A introvert
Introvert.
individual. Yeah.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
if you ever seen that movie about Earl Wyatt and those brothers in Oklahoma, did you see that? The old Western?
What's the name of that movie again?
Or it's like Earl Wyatt and they
Right.
died.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Tucson. I
yeah.
think the stories in Tucson, and it was like a Western movie. Yes.
Yeah, it was a Western. And so the older brother, the leader, that's how he was. And he would ruin everything. You know what I mean? The wives hated him.
Okay.
They wanted to just all the brothers, the wives, they wanted to leave and just split up their money. But he was the leader of the brothers.
Yeah.
And he was just cold. He was just a cold guy.
Yeah.
And nobody liked it, but the brothers, they followed him. So
Yeah.
that's interesting. If
Yeah.
they haven't seen the movie, it's a good
But
movie.
maybe this is what's missing within starting a church, that
Mm.
in the Bible says that the sons of this world are wiser than the sons of light, right? When Christ brought that parable. And when
Yeah.
you look at all business self-help books or what have you, it always says you have to establish your team. And you have to have different characters within your team to be a successful company or what have you, right? And I think I mentioned this years ago when I did a presentation on one of the tabernacle of the four principles of, or I think it was star, the four different principles. It's Patrick Ben David put it together, and I took out of his source. S, it's like star, right? STATA, right? So each one represented a personality you should have. I think A was like active action. T was technical. You need a technical person. You have another one, star R, which is relationship. One who's into hugger and come here. You need that in your crew. And you have a guy who the S. I forgot what the S is, but maybe Christ picked these men for those reasons. I need the right person, So if they were all like Peter, if they were all like Andrew, if they were all like Mark, if they were all, you understand? It would not work. So I think Christ, since the Most High was feeding him and giving him, the information was revealing to him, now pick that guy. No, don't pick that guy. And they were all personality types to show you that even God. See, you got different dimensions, right? You got the heavenly, you got the earthly, you got the fish world, right? This different dimensions. There's different rules to this dimension.
Yes, sir.
You got to follow those rules to find success, and you got and if you break those rules, you will find failure.
Right.
So this is maybe something that we have to maybe look at in starting our organization called Men Going God's Way.
Yes,
right?
sir.
I cannot only find men like me, right? Because I got limitations. So therefore, the entire organization is going to have that same limitations, right?
Right.
I got to pick different type of men with different gifts outside of my gifts, and look for men that where I'm weak and so forth, so on, right? So I'm loving this conversation because, as we know, we're talking about Men Going God's Way. There's an organization we were putting together. It's a small group. We're going to be coming tomorrow. I apologize for you. Last week we had to cancel, but we're going to be coming in to do the exercise. Next week is the deadline on that, but we're going to be discussing that for the brothers that come and show. We're going to try and come up with a exercise routine to kind of help them out, those that are coming short. And but yeah, I'm loving this conversation because it's opening up my thoughts in the possibilities, right? So let's continue reading, because I think we're in the second paragraph. Every one of his disciples loved Christ.
Okay.
Yes. Right?
Yeah.
Because the last two paragraphs. Yep.
All right. Every one of the apostles loved the Messiah, but it remains true that each of the 12 was drawn toward him because of some certain trait of personality which made a special appeal to the individual apostle. Andrew admired the Messiah because of his consistent sincerity, his unaffected dignity. When men once knew the Messiah, they were possessed with the urge to share him with their friends. They really wanted all the world to know him. When the later persecutions finally scattered the apostles from Jerusalem, Andrew journeyed through Armenia, Asia Minor, and Macedonia, and after bringing many thousands into the kingdom, was finally apprehended and crucified in Petrae and Achaia. It was 2 full days before this robust man expired on the cross. And throughout these tragic hours, he continued effectively to proclaim the glad tidings of the salvation of the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah, and that is true. There are legends in how he died, that he died in a cross, like an X.
Okay.
So both his legs were split, similar to like an X, the symbol of the X-Men. And he was prophesying and preaching the gospel in the cross for 2 days straight before he gave up the ghost. So
right.
that had been validated by other sources. Even those other sources, we have to take it from the grain of salt because, we don't know what was abolished and so forth. And I do believe some of the sources, specifically of Peter, of him starting the Church of Rome and also starting dying in Rome, I believe that was false. And I believe that all the evidence point that he died in Jerusalem. And there, I believe there is and I gotta go back to that interview. I remember when I interviewed the scholar, one of the scholars that came into that documentary called The Pattern of Evidence, the British scholar, I forget his name, but he mentioned that he agreed that Peter died trying to leave Jerusalem. Remember, he got arrested, right? And then he fled. And after that, there was an angel that opened the gates for him. Remember the story in the book of Acts? But after that, he disappeared. There's no mention of him. And then all the extra mention of Peter after that is through the so-called church fathers that mention he went to Rome. There is, I believe, a Syriac document that said that he went to was trying to go to Asia Minor or Rome or somewhere. But because at that time, why would it make sense to go to Rome? And the reason why it doesn't make sense to go to Rome, because at that time, all the Jews got expelled from Rome. That's recorded even in the Bible, right? So why he would go to Rome? So he will probably go to Asia Minor, but why, according to the Syriac story, if I remember right, an angel met him in the way and said, "You got to go back to Jerusalem and accept your fate." So according to this, scholar, and I got to get the source. I got to find that video because it was. I interviewed him in the what's that channel? The Blog Talk. Remember back in the days when I used to have what was the GOCC experience? I think on Wednesday on Blog Talk. I think I interviewed then. So we're going back maybe 7-8 years ago. So it's been a while, but I could probably, he's out there again because he's running a book. I'm not sure I could reach him, maybe interview him, bring him into the fold. Bring him into the show and maybe have that conversation. But I'm liking this because it goes into a great deal of details, and we can't confirm 100% if all of it is right, but at least that last part, how he died, where he went to preach, all of that is easily can be confirmed to our other sources, right? So let's continue reading. Now we're going to go into Simon. I also like Simon, and if this is accurate, it validates what I was saying, that Simon was not the strongest link. He had a lot of weaknesses, but his strength was he was a good preacher.
Right.
He was a good talker.
Yes, sir.
But he had weaknesses, so we're going to go into that.
Yeah, and Elder, you mentioned how when the Messiah was picking him, it was calculated, and how you theorize that the Most High was, even though humans aren't perfect, he still knew the laws of the earth, or the laws of nature, of fleshly nature.
Yeah.
So he knew which ones he had to get, what gifts they needed to have, what weaknesses they would have, where they would come up short. And that was reflected in some of the things that the Messiah would say to them, when he said, one of you will betray me, different things of that nature. But, in Genesis early on, the Most High was like, I see my spirit won't always dwell with man. So I understand that they're operating in carnality. But even with that, I'm going to give the keys so they can make it out of this thing.
Exactly. It's like perfectly imperfect group make a perfect man. So you got to find the right gifts and the right imperfections to kind of complement each other.
Right.
So where I'm weak, you're strong, and where you're weak, somebody else is strong for you. So it's like making that perfect man. And that sentiment is echoed all through the Bible, right? Making that perfect man, right? Different gifts of the Holy Spirit to make that perfect man. That is echoed. So, and I believe that should be echoed through the layman and also the leadership of any organization. Part of me going into this is concerned. I believe Men Going God's Way is starting. It's going to be successful. I believe it is. I have faith in it. But I'm scared of myself. I'm scared of me losing my wit when you're in the face of everything. I don't want that responsibility. I don't think that responsibility should be given to any man. And if Christ made it clear that this would not be so among the apostles, who are me or anybody to say, I'm going to start a church and the buck is going to stop with me? You're trying to be another pope, which is looking back. It was funny that I was having a conversation years ago with Ricard about, Ricard, you may be the new pope or what have you. But looking back, that was probably I misspoke because that kind of put people in that mindset, right? And things of that nature. I think you froze. I don't know. No, you're good. Okay, you're good. Okay, no, you're good. You're good. And even if we have, different personality that we all relate to, some people relate to Paul, some people relate to Peter, some people relate to Matthews, right? And Philip and others, right? And it's usually in the Bible because the majority, or John the Revelator, because a lot of people may not know this. And this was, shout out to Brother Trent. He told me this, and I looked it up, and it was true. There are more books of Paul's writings in the Bible, but there are more writings, or I would say words, of John. The book of John, the Gospel of John is one of the biggest, I think even longer than Matthew's. You got the book of Revelations, another long book, and you got St. John 1, 2, and 3. When you combine all the words, it's actually a little more, not that much, but more than Paul's words. So Paul has more letters, but John has more writings. When you compare all three, because John has a large body of books, so that kind of when you look, and by much, but it's more writing. So I think it's profound. I think it's profound that we're having this conversation, and yes, I'm excited to read Peter, and I see if the issue with Peter and the success of Peter resonate with some of the people. So let's go into some Peter's the character of Peter. And so forth, so on. So we'll start at top.
Okay. Simon Peter. When Simon joined the apostles, he was 30 years of age. He was married, had 3 children, and lived at Bethsaida, near Capernaum. His brother Andrew and his wife's mother lived with him. Both Peter and Andrew were fishers, partners of the sons of Zebedee. The master had known Simon for some time before Andrew presented him as the second of the apostles. When the Messiah gave Simon the name Peter, he did it with a smile. It was to be a sort of nickname. Simon was well known to all his friends as an erratic and impulsive fellow. True, later on, the Messiah did attach a new and significant import to this lightly bestowed nickname. Simon Peter was a man of impulse and optimist. He had grown up permitting himself to freely indulge strong feelings. He was constantly getting into difficulties because he persisted in speaking without thinking. This sort of thoughtlessness also made incessant trouble for all his friends and associates and was the cause of his receiving many mild rebukes from his master. The only reason Peter did not get into more trouble because of his thoughtless speaking was that he very early learned to talk over many of his plans and schemes with his brother Andrew before he ventured to make public proposals.
So he trusted on his big brother. So, I could see that resonated with me in regards of the personality of Peter, because he was always the one like, Christ, I would die for you. I would, I'm not going to allow you to be, crucified. But if he knew the scripture, he understood that the Messiah must be crucified and, and so forth, so on, right? So that resonated with me. It's like, that sounds like Peter. I don't, like I said, we need to still verify a lot of this work. And but this that sounds right in the money, and how Peter and so when you read a lot of the stuff, like, Peter, do you love me? Right? I love
Come
you,
on.
Lord.
Right.
Right? Why was
Right.
Christ warning? That sounds more like a warning, not like preparing him to be the head bishop or the pope, so to speak. But the Roman Catholic Church brainwashes to think this is talking about preparing Peter, right?
Right.
But he had weaknesses, and that's why he needed his brethren to check him, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Anything else you
And
want
we
to add?
yes, yeah, because so this is expounding on it, right? But we see three accounts where the first time, we see the Messiah telling Peter, "You're going to deny me," right? He denies him, then he runs off. We see another account where the Messiah says to him, "When thou art converted," right? "Strengthen thy brethren." When you're converted, meaning you haven't converted yet. And
Right.
then the last account, like you just broke up, that you just brought up, "Peter, do you love me?" And he kept asking him. So you see multiple accounts to where it's like, why are these things happening with Peter? And like you said, we've been conditioned to look at it one way, knowing that we live in a society that the religious power over us, they operate in papal supremacy, and Peter is used to validate that doctrine, him being the rock.
Right.
But when we read the scripture from unbiased eyes, objectively, those are things that, somebody would say as like an admonishment or warning to a person.
Right. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And we are misunderstanding that because we've been brainwashed that Peter was the head of the church.
Mm-hmm.
But when if we would not have that in our mind, and somebody would have amnesia, don't have any reference, and you say, "Here, read this book," they would not have think that Peter would be the head.
Right.
Right? They would not have had in that mindset, but it was always promoted all through the Roman Catholic Church. Peter holding the keys all over, all these idols, and that was their way of propaganda. Think about it, right? So here in America, when we now are part of a church, we're like, yeah, wasn't Peter something with the keys and something with the head? You understand? We start repeating because we're not diving into much in a much deeper way. But when we start reading and seeing, we realize that is a doctrine of devils. Because Christ told his disciples, no, there will not be a one in charge. The Messiah told us. It's almost like a warning. And so we need to relook at that. We need to relook at, and that's the reason why I'm afraid to be in charge of any organization by myself, especially a religious organization. I know Men Going God's Way is not a church, but it is a spiritual life coach organization using the biblical values to build the men, but there's also physical fitness and economics and all that, dealing with your mental state, but using the Bible as the blueprint. I don't want to be charged. I don't want to be the final word on anything. I think that's dangerous. I think that's not the way to go. But let's continue reading.
Okay. Peter was a fluent speaker, eloquent and dramatic. He was also a natural and inspirational leader of men, a quick thinker, but not a deep reasoner. He asked many questions, more than all the apostles put together. And while the majority of these questions were good and relevant, many of them were thoughtless and foolish. Peter did not have a deep mind, but he knew his mind fairly well. He was therefore a man of quick decision and sudden action. While others talked in their astonishment at seeing the Messiah on the beach, Peter jumped in and swam ashore to meet the master. The one trait which Peter admired most in the Messiah was his supernal tenderness. Peter never grew weary of contemplating the Messiah's forbearance. He never forgot the lesson about forgiving the wrongdoer, not only 7 times, but 70 times and 7. He thought much about these impressions of the master's forgiving character during those dark and dismal days immediately following his thoughtless and unintended denial of the Messiah in the high priest's courtyard. Simon Peter was distressingly vacillating. He would suddenly swing from one extreme to the other. First, he refused to let the Messiah wash his feet, and then, on hearing the master's reply, begged to be washed all over. But after all, the Messiah knew that Peter's faults were of the head and not of the heart. He was one of the most inexplicable combinations of courage and cowardice that ever lived on earth. His great strength of character was loyalty, friendship. Peter really and truly loved the Messiah. And yet, despite this towering strength of devotion, he was so unstable and inconstant that he permitted a servant girl to tease him into denying his Lord and Master. Peter could withstand persecution and any other form of direct assault, but he withered and shrank before ridicule. He was a brave soldier when facing a frontal attack, but he was a fear-cringing coward when surprised with an assault from the rear. Peter was the first of the Messiah's apostles to come forward to defend the work of Philip among the Samaritans and Paul among the Gentiles. Yet later at Antioch, he reversed himself when confronted by ridiculing Judaizers, temporarily withdrawing from the Gentiles, only to bring down upon his head the fearless denunciation of Paul. He was the first one of the apostles to make wholehearted confession of the Messiah's combined humanity and divinity, and the first, save Judas, to deny him. Peter was not so much of a dreamer, but he disliked to descend from the clouds of ecstasy and the enthusiasm of dramatic indulgence to the plain and matter-of-fact world of reality. And following the Messiah, literally and figuratively, he was either leading the procession or else trailing behind, following afar off. But he was the outstanding preacher of the 12. He did more than any other one man, aside from Paul, to establish the kingdom and send its messengers to the four corners of the earth in one generation. After his rash denials of the master, he found himself, and with Andrew's sympathetic and understanding guidance, he again led the way back to the fishnets while the apostles tarried to find out what was to happen after the crucifixion. When he was fully assured that the Messiah had forgiven him and knew he had been received back into the master's fold, the fires of the kingdom burned so brightly within his soul that he became a great and saving light to thousands who sat in darkness. Right? After leaving Jerusalem and before Paul became the leading spirit among the Gentile Christian churches, Peter traveled extensively, visiting all the churches from Babylon to Corinth. He even visited and ministered to many of the churches which had been raised up by Paul. Although Peter and Paul differed much in temperament and education, even in theology, they worked together harmoniously for the upbuilding of the churches during their later years. Something of Peter's style and teaching is shown in the sermons partially recorded by Luke and in the Gospel of Mark. His vigorous style was better shown in his letter known as the First Epistle of Peter. At least this was true before it was subsequently altered by a disciple of Paul. But Peter persisted in making the mistake of trying to convince the Jews that the Messiah was, after all, really and truly the Jewish Messiah. Right up to the day of his death, Simon Peter continued to suffer confusion in his mind between the concepts of the Messiah as the Jewish Messiah, Christ as the world's Redeemer, and the Son of Man as the revelation of God, the loving Father.
I'm sorry. And I will view this a lot of opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will use a lot of opinion. But in regards of, he did visit Babylon. There is, or we consider Iraq today. And that's the shame or the issue that Islam brought or destroyed, because Christianity was rampantly spreading through the Middle East. That's the reason why Muhammad, he was able to contend with Jews and Christians. If you had Christian churches and Israelite churches or Jewish churches in all through Iraq, all through Yemen, all through those regions, I do not know, and I may want to talk to a Muslim, what happened to those records. Those records were preserved. Are they still being preserved, or they were destroyed by the Muslims when they began to bring the descent into the world forcing conversion upon everybody. So that's
Mm.
still remains to be seen. We still, that's why men going God's way. We're not only, a people that we're going to be reading books. We want to visit these countries and talk, right, and have ambassadors having conversation with these folks to see what can we unpack from their wisdom and their history, right? So let's continue reading because I like Paul's writing. I mean, I like Paul's description. But let's continue reading because I want to jump into others, but I want to fully read Andrew and Peter, and maybe touch on some other ones because I think it's bringing a lot of new light. And the last part, like I said, I don't agree with because I believe. I question. I think I'll stay there. I'm questioning whether it's legit.
Yes, I do as well. That's the understanding of the Trinity being sprinkled in.
Yeah.
But I don't think this confusion did not exist. It doesn't explicably say that in Scripture.
Yeah.
Like anything to where they were looking at the Messiah as the Creator Himself, or that's a new thing.
Yeah. And I believe it. This anonymous writer probably doesn't exist. I believe it was that doctor himself. We probably have to do some research on who he's connected. Was he a Catholic? Was he a Jesuit? Psychiatry and all that. That started with the Jesuit order too. So
wow.
I don't know what access he had to these records to put this together.
Right.
So we have to look into that.
Okay.
So let's read Peter's wife. Is a very talks about his wife, that she was also. And then that he died in Rome, basically, was crucified in Rome. And a lot of stuff we already know because this was recorded throughout history and so forth, so on.
Want to just finish it out?
We can finish it out. Yeah.
Okay. Peter's wife was a very able woman. For years, she labored acceptably as a member of the Women's Corps, and when Peter was driven out of Jerusalem, she accompanied him upon all his journeys to the churches, as well as on all his missionary excursions. And the day her illustrious husband yielded up his life, she was thrown to the wild beasts in the arena at Rome. And so this man, Peter, an intimate of the Messiah, one of the inner circle, went forth from Jerusalem proclaiming the glad tidings of the kingdom with power and glory until the fullness of his ministry had been accomplished. And he regarded himself as the recipient of high honors when his captors informed him that he must die as his master had died on the cross, and thus was Simon Peter crucified in Rome.
Right. So that's in question because there's other records that said he died in Jerusalem through the hands of the Jews. But this is the conventional belief of Paul, and it could be right. I'm not saying it's not right, but we have to be transparently, unbiased with this, right?
Right.
Any other apostles you want to maybe perhaps dive into?
I like Matthew too.
Like Matthew's? Okay, so let's go to Matthew's. Let's see here.
Okay.
Where are your Matthews? You got Philip. Nathaniel, Matthews, Levi, also known as Levi. So let's start with him.
Okay. Matthew, the seventh apostle, was chosen by Andrew. Matthew belonged to a family of tax gatherers or publicans, but was himself a customs collector in Capernaum, where he lived. He was 31 years old and married and had 4 children. He was a man of moderate wealth, the only one of any means belonging to the apostolic corps. He was a good businessman, a good social mixer, and was gifted with the ability to make friends and to get along smoothly with the great variety of people. Andrew appointed Matthew the financial representative of the apostles. In a way, he was the fiscal agent and publicity spokesman for the apostolic organization. He was a keen judge of human nature and a very efficient propagandist. His is a personality difficult to visualize, but he was a very earnest disciple and an increasing believer in the mission of the Messiah and in the certainty of the kingdom. The Messiah never gave Levi a nickname, but his fellow apostles commonly referred to him as the money getter. Levi's strong point was his wholehearted devotion to the cause, that he, a publican, had been taken in by the Messiah, and his apostles was the cause for overwhelming gratitude on the part of the former revenue collector. However, it required some little time for the rest of the apostles, especially Simon the Zealot and Judas Iscariot, to become reconciled to the publican's presence in their midst. Matthew's weakness was his short-sighted and materialistic viewpoint of life, but in all these matters, he made great progress as the months went by. He, of course, had to be absent from many of the most precious seasons of instruction, as it was his duty to keep the treasury replenished. It was the master's forgiving disposition which Matthew most appreciated. He would never cease to recount that faith only was necessary in the business of finding the Most High. He always liked to speak of the kingdom as this business of finding the Most High. Though Matthew was a man with the past, he gave an excellent account of himself, and as time went on, his associates became proud of the publican's performances. He was one of the apostles who made extensive notes on the sayings of the Messiah, and these notes were used as the basis of Isidore's subsequent narrative of the sayings and doings of the Messiah, which has become known as the Gospel according to Matthew. Let me see. So let me see. You want to jump down to Matthew received freely tendered offerings? Okay. So Matthew received freely tendered offerings from believing disciples and the immediate auditors of the master's teachings, but he never openly solicited funds from the multitudes. He did all his financial work in a quiet and personal way and raised most of the money among the more substantial class of interested believers. He gave practically the whole of his modest fortune to the work of the master and his apostles, but they never knew of this generosity save the Messiah, who knew all about it. Matthew hesitated openly to contribute to the apostolic funds for fear that the Messiah and his associates might regard his money as being tainted. So he gave much in the names of other believers. During the earlier months, when Matthew knew his presence among them was more or less of a trial, he was strongly tempted to let them know that his funds often supplied them with their daily bread. But he did not yield. When evidence of the disdain of the publican would become manifest, Levi would burn to reveal to them his generosity, but he always managed to keep still. When the funds for the week were short of the estimated requirements, Levi would often draw heavily upon his own personal resources. Also, sometimes when he became greatly interested in the Messiah's teachings, he preferred to remain and hear the instruction, even though he knew he must personally make up for his failure to solicit the necessary funds. But Levi did so wish that the Messiah might know that much of the money came from his pocket. He little realized that the master knew all about it. The apostles all died without knowing that Matthew was their benefactor to such an extent that when he went forth to proclaim the gospel of the kingdom after the beginning of the persecutions, he was practically penniless. When these persecutions caused the believers to forsake Jerusalem, Matthew journeyed north, preaching the gospel of the kingdom and baptizing believers. He was lost to the knowledge of his former apostolic associates, but on he went, preaching and baptizing through Syria, Cappadocia, Galatia, Bithynia, and Thrace. And it was in Thrace at Lysimachia that certain unbelieving Jews conspired with the Roman soldiers to encompass his death. And this regenerated publican died triumphant in the faith of a salvation he had so surely learned from the teachings of the master during his recent sojourn on earth.
And you know how you know what I am looking at this, and I am analyzing, and I'm thinking while you're reading that this looks like, okay, remember when Christ was giving parables?
Mm-hmm.
The kingdom of heaven is like this.
Mm-hmm.
And remember the part about the servant that had a master, and he was taking a little bit up the top from the master. And the master was like, listen, bring all the books because I'm hearing you stealing money from me. And then he went to the collectors or the collectees and say, hey, listen, and cut it in half and to try to get a good rapport with those that were under the tax collecting, old debt, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if the parables of Christ were dealing with the beatitudes that we must achieve or adopt to make it into the kingdom of heaven. And the disciples did not have all the beatitudes, but had among them all the beatitudes that were necessary to enter into the kingdom of heaven. Right? Because I wonder how Matthew was thinking, right, or how he received that parable about the rich man or his servant, and the Lord said, "Come, give me, gather all the record or the books, because I'm going to let you go. I'm going to fire you. I'm here. You taken from me," or something like that, right? And tax collectors were hated, and they were always, because you have to deal with money and resources. You have to be not a stupid guy, right? You have to have some level of intelligence, education, with money and resources and percentage and all that, right? I wonder if that was a thing among tax collectors, how they got rich. You just scam a little from over the top. So people, that was like a thing, how they got, they just got wealthy because they were handling money from the Rome, tax collectors, but they took a little bit off the top and they invested a little bit in here and they, made a little side hustle there, right? And the Romans couldn't confirmed, right? They were too busy.
Right.
Israel was not the only providence that was ruling. So maybe, right, tax collectors were known to, take a little bit off the top, or you could bribe them to, fix those numbers. Because how is the Romans going to know those numbers are correct or not outside of those tax collectors? So I wonder if there's something there in why Christ chose him, but it's also now giving me a different light into the parables of Christ in regards when he says, in the kingdom of heaven, it's like this. And it goes into a parable, but the lesson of that parable is, what is the lesson you learn from this parable? And then you must apply that into your life, because if you do not do that, you're not going to enter into the kingdom of heaven, because the kingdom of heaven is like this. And that's the mystery that we're missing.
Man. Yeah.
We'll talk about this and men going God's way meetings and
yes, sir.
And because the Beatitudes, right? Right? The kingdom of heaven is like this. The kingdom of heaven is like that. There was a woman, there was a man that went up the hill, and he did this, and there's always these parables. I'm always like, why is Christ always teaching in parables? And one of the disciples asked him, remember? Why are you always speaking parables? Because the mystery of the kingdom of heaven wasn't given to everybody.
Right. Yeah. And that was what was so interesting to me about Judas, because in the account of Judas, it says clearly he understood all the lessons. It goes into all the disciples and their ability to understand the parables, the doctrines, the teachings. And it said Judas had no issue with it at all. He was with the best of them in understanding, but he couldn't embody the Beatitudes in Matthew 5, which goes to show you like the merit we put on within the Israelite community today has been like teaching and then, being able to figure things out, because that's how different churches or even people would gain a renown. But that was never the thing. Not the most important thing, because we see Peter arguably had the most deficiencies. Outside of Judas, the only one that openly denied the Messiah, but he was given the ability to teach. Where Andrew, even it speaks about Matthew being amongst people that looked down on him, and he was burning internally to tell them, you eat because of me, but he didn't. That's virtue. That's strength.
Exactly. And what was one of the parables?
Don't let your left hand know
what your right hand is doing. And remember, when you give alms, don't give it like the hypocrites.
Right.
I'm telling
Right.
you, man.
Come on.
It's this is the beauty of
Crazy.
how Christ did it.
Mm-hmm.
Christ brought in the mystery of the kingdom of heaven, but he brought it in a mysterious way, in a way that it is like, oh, this is a cute little parable. So we're not going to alter these parables because they don't mean anything. They what is this? But it was in their faces. It's brilliant how Christ set it up. So in the latter days, we could come and start figuring it out. Wait a minute. We have to apply this in our personality. We have to apply this in our personality if we want to enter into the kingdom of heaven. So we still stuck in the Mosaic laws. That's the bottom line. That's kindergarten. That's high school, baby.
Right.
This is the mystery of the kingdom of heaven. And that was never tampered with.
That's tough. Yeah. That's
Think
tough.
That.
Yeah.
Let's give
That's
the
tough.
High a round of applause for that one, man.
Praises. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's why
tough.
we have to get into, and that's the reason why he said, don't throw your pearls before swine. So we're gonna have these meetings, man, going God's way. But first, we got to get these recruits first. Right? We're still getting recruits before we have these conversations. Right? We have to make sure that we are among the right people, and we're gonna get into these beatitudes, man, because that is where the secret is at. That's where our strength lies at.
Yeah, that's the parable. I mean, can you imagine? People sitting around you, they're eating. You purchased it, right? And they looking at you taking a bite, man. This dude, they got him, this usurer, and he's just looking, but he's operating in the spirit and he's burning. He didn't even tell the Messiah. He didn't know that he knew.
Yeah.
So that's something that's highlighted. Judas understood it all. You know what I mean? You see,
or at least he understood that part.
Yeah,
right?
the teachings, the mysteries.
Yeah, he understood definitely that. And we're gonna keep reading, the brother ended up being broke. His whole fortune was dedicated to the Father. At the end of his life, he didn't have anything, and that is profound, because what did Christ says about a rich man?
He sold everything.
Right, and what he also said about a rich man, right, is harder than a camel going through a needle. That, it doesn't mean it's impossible, but Matthew had that talent. And what else did Christ said when Peter asked him, hey, we let everything go, we follow you. Whoever leaves father, mother, sister, brother, wife,
sell
land,
houses,
property, houses, he will get sevenfold. So Matthew is chilling now. He's good. He did his work.
He good.
He gave them his riches, and secretly. And I could see how people looked at him as a stuck-up, elitist, right? And now he's one of Christ's disciples. It doesn't make any sense. But secretly, he was putting in that work and not getting any credit for it, man.
No credit. Didn't even tell the Messiah. And also, and one of the most important things I wanted to read in the beginning, as far as like how we would look at them today, and I brought it a couple weeks ago that the disciples, they were men. They had families. They took care of their families. They had businesses. But when it says, the simple confounding the wise, this would be the comparison I used then. Somebody like yourself, we don't come from like generations of wealth, but if you compare that to theologians with master's degrees, their grandfather was a lawyer and he did this to build the country. That was the comparison there, because sometimes those scriptures have been used to say, like, a person might be, in a basement smoking weed, and then they find out they're an Israelite, and next week they're saying that they're Christ, and the reason why I bring it out is because there's a cultural context to where back then, to look at, like we know today, growing up, we have a Judeo-Christian society. The idea of a Messiah that forgives people is embedded in our mind. Back then, it was like you had one shot. And so the Messiah had to come. If you weren't from the family, the disciples looked at the guy who was handicapped. They said, okay, who sinned? Who made a mistake? This person or their parents? So their eyes and how they viewed it was like, there is no, if a person would be a usurer, right, or you would help the foreign power that's occupying our land, and you would go take money from people on their behalf, knowing their struggles, that, you know, we'll look at somebody who sold cars or was a
Yeah.
drug dealer, and that's
Yeah.
nothing. You
Yeah.
like, okay, brother, we all repented, but this was something foreign to them. Like, they looked at it like, we can never trust this guy. Look at what he did.
Exactly.
So now it had to be a certain level of people on a medium ground, like people who had ability, but they weren't too far gone with like a rabbinical mindset.
Yeah.
To where they could still, you know, comprehend, like, okay, forgiveness. They've been amongst normal people, because back then, when you're dealing with you know, the years that it took to convert and all of the little things you had to do, religion and the way to the Most High would have become so far from the earth. But
Yeah.
Christ came with the balance.
Yeah,
you know?
with the balance and the important things, because a lot of the Mosaic laws was a introduction to these parables. You cannot understand the parables if you don't first go to high school, go to kindergarten, go to pre. You know, you got to get the basics, and you don't disregard the basics, right? Because remember when the rich man asked Christ, "What else do I lack?" Right. So but before he said he mentioned that, you know, he mentioned that statement. Christ, he asked Christ, "What can I do to have eternal life?" Keep the commandments. I've been keeping the commandments since birth. What else do I lack?
Right.
Sell everything and follow me. Exactly and precisely what Matthews did, and he told no one. Christ knew it. Christ knew it. He knew, you know, he knew everything, or at least he knew a lot what the Father revealed to him, right? He knew their hearts, their thoughts, right? He knew it, but nobody knew it. I bet you the other disciples did not even know that Matthews was doing exactly, precisely what Christ told that young man.
Right.
It's profound stuff, man. It just brings the writings and the teachings, the gospel to light, into much better appreciation. So
yes, sir.
Let's finish up with Matt. Did we finish up with Matthews?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, we did. Let's go into, let's see here, what found of the week or short. Go to what was his weakness? The second to last paragraph.
Okay.
I think that was
Matthew. I think it mentioned he was a little materialistic.
Did we skip that? Let's go there.
You said the second to last. Okay.
To last.
It was.
Or where we left off last. Do you know?
I think we finished it.
You finished it. Okay.
We didn't. Okay, but his weaknesses, I can go back up here.
We did cover all that.
Okay.
Let's go to Thomas. I like Thomas.
Okay.
We'll read Thomas.
All
We'll see
right.
how long is Thomas. It's pretty long, but we'll highlight. And I think you wanted to touch on Judas as well, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and so let's go to Thomas, and we'll skip to Judas, which is and then people. I'm gonna put the link in the bottom. Let me see if I can find the link that I put earlier today. Where is that link? Here we go. That's the link, folks. To read it on your own. You also got the audio. They got the audio. You could just type it in, and you could hear it. But we're just gonna go through it real quick, and then maybe we could do a part two. Maybe we could do a part discussion. But I want to confirm a lot of these stuff because, like, for instance, it was true that Thomas was a wealthy man. Tax collectors were considered to be, upper middle class, right, at that time, and so this document is extrapolating a lot from early sources. Let's continue reading.
Okay, get it pulled up here. Okay, Thomas Didymus. Thomas was the 8th apostle, and he was chosen by Philip. In later times, he has become known as Doubting Thomas. But his fellow apostles hardly looked upon him as a chronic doubter. True, he was a logical, skeptical type of mind, but he had a form of courageous loyalty which forbade those who knew him intimately to regard him as a trifling skeptic. When Thomas joined the apostles, he was 29 years old, was married, and had 4 children. Formerly, he had been a carpenter and stonemason, but latterly he had become a fisherman and resided at Tarikia, situated on the west bank of the Jordan, where it flows out of the Sea of Galilee. And he was regarded as the leading citizen of this little village. He had little education, but he possessed a keen reasoning mind and was the son of excellent parents who lived at Tiberias. Thomas had the one truly analytical mind of the 12. He was the real scientist of the apostolic group.
So
The
he was.
early,
He looks like he had a scientist or a skeptic mind.
mm,
So, and I do believe you should have a skeptic in your inner circle,
mm,
right?
wow,
You wanted someone who is like, listen, I gotta see it, bro, to believe it. I got. Let me look at it. What you're telling me, okay, that's great, but I need to see it for myself. So some people, I know the world looked at it from a weakness, and yes, Christ told Thomas, "Blessed be those that believe and didn't see," right?
mm,
But I could see how being a skeptic is also important in certain situations. But I just like how this thing is putting together. But go ahead. Anything else you want
right.
to add, or
No, sir. No.
okay?
Okay. The early home life of Thomas had been unfortunate. His parents were not altogether happy in their married life, and this was reflected in Thomas's adult experience. He grew up having a very disagreeable and quarrelsome disposition. Even his wife was glad to see him join the apostles. She was relieved by the thought that her pessimistic husband would be away from home most of the time. Thomas also had a streak of suspicion, which made it very difficult to get along peaceably with him. Peter
Now,
was very
a lot of this is I haven't verified, so we have
mm,
to take this with a grain of salt about his parents. I haven't read anything. I got to do more research on him. What the early so-called fathers comment or statement on him, and we have to also look at other records because I think Thomas died in India.
mm,
Thomas died in India, and he went to India, and the story is that he went there to start an organization, a church. He got rejected a lot by the people in India because they were worshiping pagan gods. But his virtue won them over eventually. But then the elite of the community eventually killed him. And then the community built a shrine into his honor because of all the good works that he did.
mm,
He built them a water river, like a water for them to have
mm,
water, and he was like a very smart, he was a mason carpenter, so he probably knew that
mm,
how to navigate and all that building, and he built a lot of community stuff with them, and he built them a well. He built a
mm.
lot that he won them over,
Wow.
right? And eventually, and I think there's a picture of him still. Let me see if I can find him.
Okay.
Let me see if I can find it still. Let's see here.
Wow.
Picture of. Let me see if I can find what. 2 seconds, guys. I don't know what St. Thomas. It's hard to find the one that's in India.
Mm,
He looks like the best way to describe it, like he looks like a Trinidadian. He looks very.
mm,
Let me see. Hold on. Let me see. Sometimes it pops up. picture of Thomas the Apostle. I had it a long time ago, and that's why you got to save stuff from YouTube because, or the internet because but keep reading.
Okay.
I want to try to find it.
Okay.
While you're reading, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Thomas also had a streak of suspicion, which made it very difficult to get along peaceably with him. Peter was very much upset by Thomas at first, complaining to his brother Andrew that Thomas was mean, ugly, and always suspicious. But the better his associates knew Thomas, the more they liked him. They found he was superbly honest and unflinchingly loyal. He was perfectly sincere and unquestionably truthful. But he was a natural-born fault finder and had grown up to become a real pessimist. His analytical mind had become cursed with suspicion. He was rapidly losing faith in his fellow men when he became associated with the 12 and thus came in contact with the noble character of the Messiah. The association with the Master began at once to transform Thomas's whole disposition and to effect great changes in his mental reactions to his fellow men.
Now, I'm sorry to interrupt, brother. So this is the picture I was talking about. Now, this is a copy of a copy. I'm trying to find the original one. But if you could see, now some people say they try to draw him to look like an Indian, but if you look close, there's another one. Let me see. There's another one here of Thomas. But when you look at the earliest paintings, and we probably need to do a lesson on that or a conversation on that. It has him as as he looks like either a Levi or Benjamin. I don't know what tribe. He could be Judah too. But in India, we should maybe visit the shrine that they kept for him because I think they kept him because eventually they began to kind of worship him as a god, like the shrine and all that. So to kind of give you an idea what what was happening. But hold on 2 seconds. Yeah. So that history is still preserved there, and we have to see what else is there describing his virtues, right? And so forth. So yes, we people of color and all that is great, but and the Romans hiding that because psychologically, if you put all the apostles looking, blonde and blue eyes and European, it psychologically would look towards them as being the phenotype, the archetype, archetype of what is virtue, and every single time you portray a natural looking man, a brown man, a man of the earth in a negative light, it does something. So, but that's a different conversation.
Right.
Okay, where we left off. Is Thomas was the one that was always arguing. Let me see. But it's saying, then, okay, yeah, let's go down to paragraph. Sometimes Thomas would be permission from Andrew. You see that? That's like in the middle.
Oh, to leave for a couple of days. Let me see.
Where you left off, and then I'll know where you left off, where you're at, where you need to be.
Okay. So he left. Thomas was mean, ugly, and always suspicious.
Thomas was respected like Philip. Okay, Thomas has some. Okay, and that was the last paragraph, or that's the.
That was the last paragraph. His analytical mind had become cursed with suspicion. He was rapidly losing faith in his fellow men when he became associated with the 12 and thus came in contact with the noble character of the Messiah. The association with the Master began at once to transform Thomas's whole disposition and to effect great changes in his mental reactions to his fellow men. Okay. And then Thomas's great strength is where I'm at now.
Okay, Thomas' great strength. And Thomas. Okay, here we go. Thomas is a great example of human being. That okay? No, that's not it. No, that's I went too far. The one that says the last one says "Let's go," which is.
Okay.
That's the third to last.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, the third to last. Okay. Sometimes. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Yep.
Okay. So sometimes Thomas would get permission from Andrew to go off by himself for a day or two,
Yeah.
but he soon learned that such a course was not wise. He early found that it was best when he was downhearted to stick close to his work and to remain near his associates. But no matter what happened in his emotional life, he kept right on being an apostle. When the time actually came to move forward, it was always Thomas who said, "Let's go."
Right. And there was a one that during the council, he used to argue
Okay.
passionately.
I
But
have
then
it here. Yeah.
Once, the decision is gone, it's okay, what paragraph is that?
Okay. So it says 1562.2. So if you go up,
1562,
if
15.
yep, if you go up from what we just read, 1, 2, 3,
Yeah.
then it's right there.
Yeah, the other apostles, right?
Yep. Okay.
Okay,
No,
yeah.
it says in the councils.
In the
right?
council. That's it. That's the one.
Okay.
Let's go.
Yep.
Yeah.
In the councils of the 12, Thomas was always cautious, advocating a policy of safety first. But if his conservatism was voted down or overruled, he was always the first fearlessly to move out in execution of the program decided upon. Again and again would he stand out against some project as being foolhardy and presumptuous. He would debate to the bitter end, but when Andrew would put the proposition to a vote, and after the 12 would elect to do that which he had so strenuously opposed, Thomas was the first to say, "Let's go." He was a good loser. He did not hold grudges nor nurse wounded feelings. Time and again did he oppose letting the Messiah expose himself to danger. But when the master would decide to take such risks, always was it Thomas who rallied the apostles with his courageous words. "Come on, comrades. Let's go and die with him."
Right. So the reason why this resonated with me, because this kind of like, okay, I probably am not as cautious as Thomas.
Mm.
I'm more, I do jump. Well, these days I'm looking before I'm jumping, but right, wisdom tells you that, right? After you get burned after a certain time, right? But Thomas, the reason why I like Thomas, and because he was cautious, he was a skeptic, and you need that around you, because a skeptic could bring out or point out something that you're not looking, or you're blindside because you're so eager to go. But once that skepticism gets addressed with Thomas, right, and they come to a resolution, a vote, he's like, okay, let's go. Because not every plan is 100% foolproof, right? There's always, someone can always figure out how to get in and infiltrate, and then you have to create new defenses, and then somebody else create a different, a loophole, and you have to create another defense. That's part of life. Sometimes you have to take the best percentage of a mathematical equation, and it might not be 100%, it might be 80%, 90%, 70%, 64%, 65%. Okay, it's more than half. Let's go with that, because that's what we have, right? That's my personality. I need a skeptic in my community, in my inner circle, right? Because I'm like, let's go right now, let's pull the trigger right now kind of guy. And that's why I like Thomas, and it goes back into the body of Christ, of people that we need around us. Where we're weak, we need we need a Thomas, right? So it's funny how something that is considered to be a negative thing, where he didn't trust his friends, his disciples, and we saw Christ, and he was like, yeah, okay, I believe you, but I need to see him for myself, because skeptics are like, it's not that they don't believe you, they need to see it for themselves, because they need to know that you're not being fooled either. Right. So we do need a skeptic among us. Anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, when you mention the body of Christ, typically when you hear that in organizations, it's always used as an explanation of people with authority saying, you guys do the things that are not important, but it's okay because the body of Christ needs you, as opposed to we see here councils of equal authority and votes on weighty matters and decisions being reasoned out, and rather the body of Christ reflecting the gifts of those people that have equal authority on high things, not just a way to like sort of pander to, hey, I got all the tough things to figure out. That's on me, but brother, we need you too. It's not that we don't see it, and that's the residue of papal supremacy. Even though we've been ascribing to like Eastern theology as far as maybe in the teachings and the doctrines, we've still kept many Western traditions. Like in Christ said it, the leader of the Gentiles rules these way. Yeah. They operate that way.
Exactly. And because remember when Israel wanted a king? Like the nations? And you remember when the prophet Samuel said, listen, they wanted him to be a king, right? And if you want a king, you have to then worry about that's going to bring new problems that you right now don't have, because now you have to take care of him. You have to give him all this, accolade. You have to respect him. He's the king. You're giving another man authority in this system of the judges and priests. It's perfect that you don't need a leader. Yeah, there are leaders. There's eldership and Supreme Court and all that, but it's a system that is not one individual.
Wow.
And that's what Christ is trying to establish. And I think he was trying to tell that to his disciples. And it looked like that was something all through the churches before the Roman Catholic Church got the gripping hands on our records. They was always understood. What is the first council the apostle had recorded in history in the Bible?
Was it Pentecost?
The first council, the first meeting that came together, there was much debate, or they needed to come to Jerusalem and had the first council.
Was that when they? No, I'm not sure. Was it when they told Paul the Nazarite to walk with the Nazarites?
That was when he came back. The first council was there was the Pharisees that believe said that the Gentiles must be circumcised. To be saved.
Circumcised. Acts 22.
Right. Acts 15 actually.
Acts 15 and 22.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Right. Actually, no. I will have to disagree. The first council we got in history is when Judas fell.
Acts 6.
Acts 6 will be considered. I wanted to say that, but actually, remember when Peter said, listen, we have to vote. And Lot fell upon who? Matthias. What is a lot? It's a vote. Right? Right? That was the first council. Then the second one is when the Greeks, the Grecian Jews and the Hebrew Jews were fighting or arguing about the widows were not being taken care of in the table.
That's it.
And they had a council, the 12. And they chose men, right? So you see that pattern all through the Bible.
Right.
Why are we not continuing that with the churches? And that's what's missing.
Yeah.
See, a lot of people don't understand that. I've been on this for a few years now, and this is what, when I left GOCC, and people like, Elder Gabar, let's start another church, we'll follow you. I knew, because my heart was like, it didn't feel right. I already was exposed to this information. I was already looking into that. I was like, nah, I'm not going to do that.
Wow.
I'm not going to do that. It doesn't feel right. There's something wrong. And that's why I'm pausing. And I want people to walk with me here and to continue studying and looking into that. If this is something that we're missing among the churches.
It has to be, Elder. It has to be, because the thing is, and I said definitely not on the scale of yourself, but I was a part of an organization prior, and I as well had people that were willing to, humbly, come with me and follow me, and it was like me, especially being younger, and it wasn't on the scale of you. I hadn't had that much experience, but it was like I knew there were things that are required for people, like for a group of people that I did not possess. Though, yeah, I've done things, but I knew, I was like, nah, there has to be more. I didn't know, I hadn't heard the apostolic succession, but I knew there was things I didn't understand yet. As far as, you hear different things on prophecies, where to go if COVID happens, where will you lead the people, and that's on you. And so I'm like, one person can't do it, and it's flattering, at first thought, but you like, nah, I'm not able to. And so that's when I heard, I think, the 7 principles, I was like, wow, that's it. Because that void, where some people have that void, but they look at, well, the people want to follow me, so look, I'm gonna do it. But I'm like, nah, I'll come up short and I'll fail you eventually, and then you'll be looking at me. And so the first thing that Samuel did when they were telling him about the king, he began to explain human nature. This is what will happen. Your sons, your daughters, that will fail you.
Yes, but check this out. Check this out.
Mm.
You know that this is a pattern, especially within the Israelite community, in the Christian community too.
Mm.
You have a young deacon. He's learning under a bishop. They have a falling out, and then they do their own thing, right?
Mm.
Or they outgrow their bishop and they do their own thing.
Mm.
And they usually do their own thing because a lot of people give them compliments. You're a great preacher, brother. You are a great orator. You could go speak. You could bring the gospel. You have this calling. And what the person who's telling them that, and the person who's hearing it, what that person's really telling them, oh, you're like Peter. But Peter had flaws. So there's a lot of Peters running around because they're good speakers, good lesson, good teachers. But the church is crumbling because those churches usually end up being corrupt because instead of fighting for Peter, you got to fight for the other 11. You need an Andrew. You need a Thomas. Right? You need a Matthew. A man that dealing with business and
wow.
And that's what's missing. And that's the reason why I was hesitant. I was like, I'm not gonna do this whole church thing and call it whatever. I'm not gonna do that because was sitting on this for a little bit and I wasn't sure, but I realized there had to be something that was missing. And I think this is what's missing. I think we got to continue expounding upon this. And the brothers, especially the sisters, but the brothers, we have to continue doing this because we don't have all the pieces yet. There's certain things are missing. We have to constantly seek, and I think this is the mystery which we're uncovering, right?
Right.
Anything else you want to add? Let's go. We covered that.
Yeah.
Okay. You wanted? I think you wanted to touch on Judas a little bit, correct?
Yes, sir. Yeah,
right,
yeah. Yes, sir. And I just wanted to mention, and so the significance of this document and why it sticks out is because in the West, they deify the apostles as well as they did with Christ. So they don't look at them from a human perspective. Yes. So if you were to look up some information, everything you see is like some, these magical words and Andrew, the first of the apostles in some godly light. But the importance of this, those of us who know that the Messiah walked the earth as a man, had a father, had a mother, the apostles came up short. We can really look at it and see how many of our churches and organizations have failed, though we had truth. We'll see. We haven't done the miracles yet. We've been able, many people will look at and say, wow, they have the right information, but I think it's missing something. A lot of celebrities or rich people, and it hasn't in its totality really embodied the fruit of the scriptures. And this is why. So this is what makes this so important, because it shows the strength the weaknesses, and you can see them from a more human perspective, but together what they were able to accomplish.
Exactly. And that's the extra sauce, extra ingredients that is missing in church building.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And building the body of Christ. It got to start from the foundation first.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the foundation has to be right. When Christ, think about it, the fact that he was looking for 12 men, not one man, right? Because he could have done it himself, but he knew that he would leave the earth, but he needed to leave somebody behind, and who did he left? The 12 apostles.
Right.
And so why we are not mimicking that, right? As bodies of Christ. So let's go into the last point, Judas.
Okay.
All right, because there were certain things that we could learn from his failure in our journey, right?
Right. Because everybody looks at the scriptures and we see ourselves as like David, and you got to watch out for the Sauls, and then we call everybody else Judas, but it's like they were humans, and we get overcome with these emotions. And so the story's still being written. You never know. But once you look at, like the scriptures say something, if any man thinketh he knoweth anything, he knoweth nothing yet, as he ought to know. And so within, we call it the truth. I don't have an issue with saying the religion, because I wouldn't go around saying that I have the truth or I'm a part of the truth. I believe the scriptures are true, though. But to even identify it as that, but I know that that's what we deem it. But that in and of itself can be dangerous, because we're saying, look, we're in the truth. Everybody else is not, and that can distort people's view and prevent growth. And we've seen it on high levels to where people, they really won't receive correction or consider the opportunity that we're headed down the wrong path. There's a term in political science, it's called like naive realism, or you hear like in-group, out-group theory. It's like us, within our group, we know what's going on. Let me enlighten you. And you go to and you speak to people with like an arrogance that I know I'm right. Let me help you out. And that's dangerous, because that's how you end up being wrong.
And I think that comes from people being afraid if we don't come with an assertive ideology, people are gonna just try to debate us and argue. We need an assertive type of thing. And once someone is convinced that what I believe is right, and I start a church, and then people say, yeah, you're a good preacher, and then they'll start coming towards your organization, and starts growing, that spirit that because you was the only guy, and you started, you probably had a friend, right? And then you started and you began to grow, that spirit eventually gets inflamed, because the home of the truth, that started with the One West Israelite brothers, right? We're the home of the truth. And I could see at that time, and I lived it, I believe we had the truth. Despite all its problems that I saw, the Most High is going to work it out. But this is the home of the truth. And that's what I'm trying to avoid, because we could become, and men going God's way. I keep repeating, it's not a church, because I think that church, although it is mentioned in the Bible, creates that spirit in you of like us against them. And yes, all through the Bible was us against them, right? He is there's not with me, is against me. If you reject the gospel, so Christ gave an absolute statement. There's I'm the way, the truth, the life, and I concur with that. But we as human beings, because we have these flaws, like the apostles have these flaws, and this book is pointing those out accurately, and although I don't believe it came through a divine intervention, but and most scholars believe that this is plagiarized work. We can learn from this work because a lot of things could be verified. Peter
Right.
was a hothead, right? How can in one breath he's saying, "You are the Son of the living God,"
Mm.
and then a young woman, peasant said, "Isn't you one of his disciples?" No, and denied. I don't know this guy.
Right.
The same guy that he said, "You're the Son of God."
Mm.
So he
Right.
was a hot and cold kind of guy.
Right. Absolutely.
So he had those weaknesses. So, but he had talents. He knew how to speak. He knew how to preach. He knew how to convince people. When you read that sermon that he brought in Acts chapter 2, that was a powerful sermon.
Mm. Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
He
Yes, sir.
quoted Psalms. We got King David, and his sepulcher is here with us. But even he prophesied. He quoted Psalms. So he understood how to
Mold
capture,
the people.
mold the people, and that was his strength. But he also had weaknesses.
He had weaknesses. Yes, sir. Yeah. So if I could clarify, it's like I wholeheartedly believe the gospel is true, right? Yeah. The Torah is true, but I'm flawed as a person. So if I adopt the idea that because these things are true, I ascribe to them. I ascribe to the idea that I'm an Israelite, that I now walk around thinking that I can convince everybody of what I believe to be true. I think that is a danger, because still we have to embody the teachings and then be a representation. Yeah. And as I keep them, as I grow in my virtue, then I can become that example. But I've seen personally many examples where people get in this understanding. It has done damage to our people, literal damage, because you've had broken people get an idea of that they have the universal truth, the kingdom of heaven. And it's I've literally seen it. Our people have been damaged. Damaged. I mean, in a practical sense, people have been abused because of it. You know what I mean? Because like people have become fanatical with the understanding. So we still.
Yeah, he has a demon in him, right? He has a spirit, and now you start acting, treating that person like they're, and absolutely.
Yeah. So that's you practice. I don't have an issue with the word religion, but I know that's something that's spookified amongst our people. Yeah. But I practice and I try to keep the scriptures and not be found with fault, because people like Judas, people like Saul, these were normal people that were overcome with spirits, and they did grave things. Yeah. And so you got take heed. Any man thinketh he standeth, take heed lest he fall, because we can become overcome with those things. So this is why, Judas stuck out, because we just demonize him. You see a few scriptures about him. Yeah, he was dark. He was created for destruction, and we don't realize how those emotions can overcome us, because we're human.
Yeah. And the spectrum. I think the lesson today is that we have a little bit on all of us, a little bit of the 12 apostles. There's spectrum to this, right? Some are stronger than others in regards. You know what I'm saying? We all have a little Judas in us. We all have a little Matthews in us. We all have a little David in us. Peter in us. We have a little bit of Andrew, right? It's all spectrum, right? Of it, right? And what can we learn from these shortcomings? But what I like about this conversation is that now this could also teach men what kind of men or friendship or wolf pack or inner circle or community you want to be. Like in other words, I'm lacking on this. I'm not a technical kind of guy. I'm not a skeptic kind of guy. I need a skeptic around me. I need a God-fearing man that is a skeptic, that believes in God, is loyal, but he could probably bring something out that I don't see. I need an Andrew in my life, a brother who could organize stuff behind the scenes, right? Is a good judge of character, right? If whatever I'm lacking, I need these personality, and I may be exactly the friend or colleague that guy who I need I could be his strength, where I'm looking at him because he's compensating my weaknesses, but his weaknesses is my strength, and we both complementing each other. And that's that balance that we have to look at, and I'm loving this conversation because
yes, sir.
It's it would. Now hopefully people are seeing it. I hope people are seeing it and seeing that, hey, it's this is a collective from the bottom to the top, but especially in the top, because that Satan always want to take down the head. You take down the head, the body will fall. Let's continue learning. So let's read a little bit about Judas, who, was the one who betrayed Christ, and what this document says about his fall.
Okay. Judas Iscariot, the 12th apostle, was chosen by Nathanael. He was born in Kirioth, a small town in southern Judea. When he was a lad, his parents moved to Jericho, where he lived and had been employed in his father's various business enterprises until he became interested in the preaching and work of John the Baptist. Judas's parents were Sadducees, and when their son joined John's disciples, they disowned him. When Nathanael met Judas at Taricia, he was seeking employment with the fish drying enterprise at the lower end of the Sea of Galilee. He was 30 years of age and unmarried when he joined the apostles. He was probably the best educated man among the 12 and the only Judean in the master's apostolic family. Judas had no outstanding trait of personal strength, though he had many outwardly appearing traits of culture and habits of training. He was a good thinker, but not always a truly honest thinker. Judas did not really understand himself. He was not really sincere in dealing with himself. Andrew appointed Judas treasurer of the 12, a position which he eminently fitted to hold, and up to the time of the betrayal of his master, he discharged the responsibilities of his office honestly, faithfully, and most efficiently. There was no special trait about the Messiah which Judas admired above the generally attractive and exquisitely charming personality of the master. Judas was never able to rise above his Judean prejudices against his Galilean associates. He would even criticize in his mind many things about the Messiah, him whom 11 of the apostles looked upon as the perfect man, as the one altogether lovely and the chiefest among 10,000. This self-satisfied Judean often dared to criticize in his own heart. He really entertained the notion that the Messiah was timid and somewhat afraid to assert his own power and authority. Judas was a good businessman. It required tact, ability, and patience, as well as painstaking devotion to manage the financial affairs of such an idealist as the Messiah, to say nothing of wrestling with the helter-skelter business methods of some of his apostles. Judas really was a great executive, a far-seeing and able financier, and he was a stickler for organization. None of the 12 ever criticized Judas. As far as they could see, Judas Iscariot was a matchless treasurer, a learned man, a loyal, though sometimes critical apostle, and in every sense of the word, a great success. The apostles loved Judas. He was really one of them. He must have believed in the Messiah, but we doubt whether he really loved the Messiah with a whole heart. The case of Judas illustrates the truthfulness of that saying, "There is a way that seemeth right to a man, but the end thereof is death." It is altogether possible to fall victim to the peaceful deception of pleasant adjustment to the path of sin and death. Be assured that Judas was always financially loyal to his master and his fellow apostles. Money could never have been the motive for his betrayal of the master. Judas was the son of unwise parents. When he was young, he was pampered and petted. He was a spoiled child. As he grew up, he had exaggerated ideas about his self-importance. He was a poor loser. He had loose and distorted ideas about fairness. He was given to the indulgence of hate and suspicion. He was an expert at misinterpretation of the words and acts of his friends. All through his life, Judas had cultivated the habit of getting even with those whom he fancied had mistreated him. His sense of values and loyalties was defective. To the Messiah, Judas was a faith adventure. From the beginning, the master fully understood the weakness of this apostle and well knew the dangers of admitting him to fellowship. But it is the nature of the sons of the Most High to give every created being a full and equal chance for salvation and survival. The Messiah wanted not only the mortals of this world, but the onlookers of innumerable other worlds to know that when doubts exist as to the sincerity and wholeheartedness of a creature's devotion to the kingdom, it is the invariable practice of the judges of men fully to receive the doubtful candidate. The door of eternal life is wide open to all. Whomsoever will may come. There are no restrictions or qualifications, save the faith of the ones who come. This is just the reason why the Messiah permitted Judas to go on to the very end, always doing everything possible to transform and save this weak and confused apostle. But when light is not honestly received and lived up to, it tends to become darkness within the soul. Judas grew intellectually regarding the Messiah's teachings about the kingdom, but he did not make progress in the acquirement of spiritual character as did the other apostles. He failed to make satisfactory personal progress in spiritual experience. Right. So that was one thing I wanted to highlight. So intellectually, he comprehended the teachings about the kingdom, the mysteries, the information, the knowledge. He did, but he did not make progress in the acquirement of spiritual character as did the other apostles. So that's the distinction we see between knowledge and virtue. He couldn't bring himself to do the things.
Yeah. And I think it goes to what it says earlier that he was not real to himself. He was not really sensible in dealing with himself, right? He was not, and you meet people like that, like, yeah, I don't have a temper. Yeah, they always find an excuse not to say, yeah, that's a flaw that I have to work on. So I think it started with him because he was probably pampered. And like I said, I got to still do some research to see what is and can be confirmed or not. What because I'm pretty sure a lot of the church fathers, probably so-called church fathers, wrote about him and his personality and why he fell. And I'm pretty sure this article or this letter scrapped a lot from that. But it's right on. I mean, it's bringing a lot of information that I feel we could learn from his fall. Right. We all have a little bit of Judas in us, I think. But this explaining in great detail. But anything else you want to add?
Yeah. I mean, just really being able to look at it like they were humans. We're human, but when you just read the Bible, it's like, yep, Judas was just evil. Don't be a Judas, and we don't realize we're close, between life and death all the time. And when we don't deal with it, like it's easy for a person to say, I'm a drunkard, I'm a fornicator, I stole, because those are our physical acts. But to be like introspective as far as judging and correcting your character. Yeah. Like I have bouts of pride. I'm not ready to acknowledge, flaws or mistakes I've made without excuse or without justification. Those things are hard. And so whereas the other apostles, they were doing that when the Messiah was bringing the parables, they were able to look and see themselves in those parables, so when faced with it, they could make the right decision. But Judas, he was listening, comprehending it, but he wasn't putting himself in that seat. And many people are, that happens all the time. What I mean? So it's like,
me. That's not, I would never do that. I would die for the Most High. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So if you don't comprehend the potential of being Judas, you're guilty of what Judas was doing, and you're capable,
I see, I'm sorry to interrupt. I see comparing virtues or shortcomings of Peter and Judas, in a sense that Peter could have ended up like a Judas, but he that's why the Most High was looking out for him, or Christ was looking out for him, but he had those hot and cold. right? He's ready to chop out a Roman, soldier's ear real quick, but then deny Christ later on and be like, I don't know that guy, and not. But I think what Peter did, he acknowledged his faults.
Yeah.
I think that was his strength at the end, that he acknowledged his fault. I think Judas didn't, and that's how he fell. But go ahead,
Yes,
you want to say?
Oh no. That's it. Like, not being able to do that. We aren't as far from these characters. And I think that's what's so special about this writing, because it shows the apostles in a human light. And you can't find that, like, in English in the West, at least we haven't yet. To where it's really describing the human experience that they all had.
Yeah, and shout out to Sadazaka. He said, the 12 Patriarchs. That's another good book. We should go into it because it goes into each patriarch, each of the the father of the tribes, warned their children about their flaws. So we could maybe and that is more legit in regards of actual writings from our forefathers, and it's ancient. I believe it was also, parts of it was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I have to double check, but it was quoted by early church fathers. It was quoted by, I think there's quote even in the Apostle. I mean, in the New Testament. I gotta check. But yeah, we could maybe could do a lesson on that next week on the 12 Patriarchs and what they learned about themselves and what they want their children. Because those are probably characteristics that exist within the tribes. That makes sense, that we probably have to work on this. So that's probably something that Judah has to work on, that Simeon has to work on something else, and Levi has to work on something else. Issachar has to work on something, because we may have certain curses that has been trickled down to our bloodline. So absolutely.
And that's perfect. The 12 Patriarchs, because those are lessons like on actual virtue, especially Benjamin, going into heavy when he was just describing his brother Joseph, like how Joseph would perceive somebody that was against him, and how he would pity him, be patient with them, the virtuous man, he would love him as his own soul, and going into that. And so that is virtue. It's not so much physical acts of the law, which is important, and that's a cultural thing, because any group of people would have to have a law. But this is, when Paul is saying like these things, that's easy. That's a schoolmaster. Of course, you have to have a law. Like, we don't jaywalk in America. You're off on Christmas. You know what I mean? These are federal laws.
Yeah, we've been harping about our sovereignty laws when we are a nation, but we are forgetting about the virtual laws that we would need when we are no longer a nation. Right? What is more important to know? How to properly, cook a meal kosherly, how to, keep the Sabbath perfectly, or those virtues of hating your brother without a cause, right? You have, it has been said in ancient time, that should not kill. But I say, if you hate your brother without a cause, right? You're then to hellfire. These are beatitudes that is going to sustain us in our captivity, in our diaspora. So we'll it's important. So let's continue reading, and then we'll wrap it up. I think today was a good discussion. Like I said, folks, this document is not something that we accept as legit. We don't believe this was divine. But we do believe it was plagiarized, and we could. But a lot of these records we could find, we could verify, others not. But in the same way that, like the Gospel of the 12 or the Quran is not divine, but all scholars agree that it's been plagiarized work from much older work that is being considered to be divine. Right? Or at least legit. So let's continue reading. And what can we learn from this, the life and death of Judas?
Right. Okay. Judas became increasingly a brooder over personal disappointment.
Let's pick it up where you at. Judas,
Okay.
you are in paragraph. Judas was a good businessman. No, not that one.
No, I finished that. He failed to make satisfactory personal progress and
Okay.
spiritual experience.
Okay. And what is the first three letters words?
Judas became increasingly a brooder.
Got it. Got you.
Okay. Yep. Judas became increasingly a brooder over personal disappointment. And finally, he became a victim of resentment. His feelings had been many times hurt, and he grew abnormally suspicious of his best friends, even of the master. Presently, he became obsessed with the idea of getting even, anything to avenge himself. Yes, even betrayal of his associates and his master. But these wicked and dangerous ideas did not take definite shape until the day when a grateful woman broke an expensive box of incense at the Messiah's feet. This seemed wasteful to Judas, and when his public protest was so sweepingly disallowed by the Messiah right there in the hearing of it all, it was too much. That event determined the mobilization of all the accumulated hate, hurt, malice, prejudice, jealousy, and revenge of a lifetime. And he made up his mind to get even with he knew not whom. But he crystallized all the evil of his nature upon the one innocent person and all the sordid drama of his unfortunate life, just because the Messiah happened to be the chief actor in the episode which marked his passing from the progressive kingdom of light into that self-chosen domain of darkness. The master, many times, both privately and publicly, had warned Judas that he was slipping, but divine warnings are usually useless in dealing with embittered human nature. The Messiah did everything possible, consistent with man's moral freedom, to prevent Judas's choosing to go the wrong way. The great test finally came. The son of resentment failed. He yielded to the sour and sordid dictates of a proud and vengeful mind, of exaggerated self-importance, and swiftly plunged on down into confusion, despair, and depravity.
Yeah.
Judas then entered into the base and shameful intrigue to betray his Lord and master, and quickly carried the nefarious scheme into effect. During the outworking of his anger-conceived plains of traitorous betrayal, he experienced moments of regret and shame, and in these lucid intervals, he faint-heartedly conceived, as a defense in his own mind, the idea that the Messiah might possibly exert his power and deliver himself at the last moment. When the sordid and sinful business was all over, this renegade mortal who thought lightly of selling his friend for 30 pieces of silver to satisfy his long-nursed craving for revenge, rushed out and committed the final act in the drama of fleeing from the realities of mortal existence, suicide. The 11 apostles were horrified, stunned. The Messiah regarded the betrayer only with pity. The worlds have found it difficult to forgive Judas, and his name has become eschewed throughout a far-flung universe.
So according to this record, and I know there's extra records out there on what was the fault of Judas and why he fell as a apostle, and a lot of people associated he was stealing money and greed. It gets associated with that. But in this record, it says there was more that he was angry that Christ called him out or corrected him publicly about the oil that the young lady was baptizing Christ with or anointing with for his burial. That maybe he got embarrassed. That was like, you understand?
Right.
Christ says, listen, leave the woman alone. You always have to pour on you. So I could see maybe his pride got to him, and him getting corrected. Hey, brother, you hear that all the time, with brothers.
Yes, sir.
Hey, brother, the way you talk to me, you could have come to me privately, brother.
Right.
My wife was there, or my friends was there, or I'm respect. Maybe, and I could see how could somebody be feel that way. But if this is Christ the Messiah, you got to humble yourself. I mean, So I think maybe it was a little bit of that. What you saw from this writing?
Yes, sir. Yeah. So it said eschewingly, as in I think Judas, it was him putting on an attempt to be clever. I imagine they all wanted to help the Messiah, and always you know that's naturally the what you would take on, like, hey, you think of this, you think of that, and then the Messiah sort of shoot it like Judas. The poor is always with you, like you know what I mean. Come on, man, like
Yeah.
just relax. And so that was like an embarrassing thing, because he cast it down openly. And you know, if Judas is overcome with these feelings of self importance, he prides himself on being seen, how he views himself to be, and the Messiah is just like, all right, man, come on. And so,
and for the record, you know, in the Bible it does says that let the Bible be true to every man liar, that he did this not because he cared for the poor, but because he had the bag, right, something like that. In the scripture.
Yes, sir.
I think that's biblical. I don't think that's extra. But nevertheless, the point is received.
Yes, sir. Yeah,
because you're right. Sometimes someone would do something in good jest, but they're doing it to feel good because it looks good.
Yeah.
You know, I have told people before, like, listen, brother, don't try to impress me. You know, I hear you trying to do good. Be start with the impress, because you know, and I have to have a sit down and talk with them. I said, you know, like the way I feel is that you always want to do something good because you kind of want maybe you didn't have a father or a disappointed mother that didn't really gave you compliments or personal encouragement. So sometimes people would want to do good to someone who they feel that they're an authority or someone they look up to, because they really have issues with their father or their mother, that their mother always maybe looked down on them, and then or they remember the first time where they got a good compliment by their parents or someone who they felt of authority, and that they want that endorphin, they want to bring, they want to feel that endorphin over and over again. So, you know, people just, you know, you can't, before Satan gets you, and we call that person evil, or he's just evil, a lot of it comes from hurt and pain and trauma in the past that we don't deal with. And because, you know, according to this narrative, he was not real to himself. So he was denying his feelings instead of trying to unpack, why do I do this? Why did I feel this way? And it does it come from a sincere place? He didn't do that. And when the lesson that I take from this narrative is that that's the beginning of his fall. He was not true to himself, and he didn't acknowledge his shortcoming. He always found an excuse, and that's how Satan got him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an age-old maxim, to thine own self be true.
Be true.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, I think it was a good discussion. Shalom to everybody who's joining us. I think, you know, this was more discussion. You know, I think more research needs to be done on this subject. And I want to, I'll probably bring it. Let me bring this video here on the history of the Pope and where it got started, and but more importantly, this is from the horse's mouth. This is Catholic saying where this thing started. So it's not me using a source that is combative to the Roman Catholic Church, right? So I'm gonna play a little bit of it, and then we could. I want to hear. You know, we could maybe comment on the situation. Fair use.
When most people think about the Catholic Church, the first image that comes to mind is the Pope. And why wouldn't it? Popes have often been the most influential figures in the history of the Church, promulgating doctrine, leading nations, and kissing all the babies. And yet, when we look to the early history of the Church, such a figure seems absent. There's no central leader of the whole Church, no one claiming primacy, and certainly no one using the name Pope or Supreme Pontiff until hundreds of years into Church history. While some will point to this as evidence that the papacy was made up years later, Catholics will argue that, like our understanding of the sacraments, dogmas of the Church, and even our relationship with God, some legitimate and original aspects of the church take time to develop. This
So you hear what he says? He said that you cannot find anything within early Christendom that remotely resemble the Pope in the Roman Catholic Church. You know, he's unfallible. That means he can do whatever, no mistakes. Papa Supreme. That means he's the supreme authority, the vicar of Christ. You cannot find anything until 1870.
Wow.
Right? So you could tell this was like a graduate increase of authority. Right? So and I want to touch on another
and I can't hear it, you know, through the Zoom. So
oh, you cannot hear it. Okay, let me do this. 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 Okay. 2 seconds, folks. Let me do this. Oh, one more thing. Let me share the sound so you could hear it. We'll merge the sound. Share sound. Boom. Okay. Could you hear it now?
is Catholicism in focus.
no.
Negative?
No.
Okay. I want to make sure. Let me do it again. Let me do something else. Let me. Okay. Let me start here. Okay, can you hear it now?
Absolute monarch of the church and nation began to develop.
Okay, so fair use. Pay attention what this Roman Catholic, right, member is saying about the Roman Catholic history, right? The title of this video is "Where Did the Papacy Came From?"
And hold supreme. Departing from the patristic model in which bishops served as the head of their individual diocese and worked in communion with the Pope, the first among equals, the Pope began to be...
The Pope, it says the first among equals, and it says instead of working together, then it got changed. Let me back it up a little bit. Let me back it up. Yeah, let me start here. Fair use.
As strange as it sounds, popes did not appoint bishops, didn't govern the universal church through the Roman Curia, didn't write encyclical letters or mandate authoritative catechisms, and didn't even use the title Vicar of Christ. For the most part, they served as the Bishop of Rome and a mediator between the other sees. With Gregory VII and his reforms at the end of the 11th century, this all began to change. Over the next 800 years, the image of the Pope as the absolute monarch of the church and nation began to develop and hold supreme. Departing from the patristic model in which bishops served as the head of their individual diocese and worked in communion with the Pope, the first among equals, the Pope began to be seen as the sole central authority, from which bishops received their power and owed their allegiance. This found its height at the First Vatican Council in 1870, responding to modernist attacks, division...
1870. This found in the First Vatican Council in 1870. This was when they began to start elevating the power or the authority of the Pope. Prior to that, a Pope was just simply the first among equals, meaning in every region you had a representative of the church. And the head bishop, but that head bishop didn't have full authority. Those head bishops had bishops under him, but he has to come together with all the other bishops. So there were several popes, if you will. Several, and that's a thing we have to even address because Christ said, call no man father. So that was wrong too, right? But nevertheless, we understand there's going to be a falling away the true message, and then it's going to come back at the latter end because the true gatekeepers will be thrown into captivity, and the temple of Jerusalem will be destroyed and all that. But regardless, that term was associated with a regional leader who come together with the other regional leaders and decide what is best for the global church, right? So that sounds more similar into what we're talking about than simply what is being established now, right? Fair use.
With Protestants and an overall weakening of church authority, the council promulgated two definitive statements: papal primacy and papal infallibility. Even without a full definition of these terms, as that would be a video in itself, one can imagine that this marked a major step in the church's understanding of papal authority and leadership in the church, and yet another major rift between Catholics and non-Catholic Christians. For many theologians, what was said about the Pope at this time was not incorrect or out of line with the church's tradition, it was simply left incomplete. With all the emphasis placed on the Pope during the council, no time was left to define the role of the other bishops, or really, the rest of the church. Nearly 100 years later, at the Second Vatican Council, the church worked at achieving that balance by restoring some of the lost elements of our tradition, while affirming...
So, and that's why these guys are always, and that's something else, that's a major thing within the Roman tradition, right? That they, or Esau as a whole, when they take over something, they plant themselves into the earliest history of that organization. When Alexander, right, died, and he separated his kingdom into 4 parts. Ptolemy, who took over Egypt, right, in that area, what did he begin to do? He began to put his family into the family line of the pharaohs and start placing their names and their dead relatives in much older tombs to make it seem like they were there when people go back into history, they would think that, oh, the Macedonians or the Macedonians, ruled Egypt from ancient times, or older than there really was, right? And this also could be recorded in the Apocrypha, when the Jews found the enemies, the Edomites, those that were trying to conquer their land. They began to put what? Their images in our records. So this is not they didn't only do this with the Jews, they did this with the Egyptians. They did this with every single institution they take over. They put themselves in as like, we were over here, right? So when in Rome, when their doctrine, right, we began to be developed, they started creating the narrative that, oh, no, this is what Christ meant to establish in the order. We're just figuring it out now. Right? And so we just correcting what was lost. But Christ never appointed a pope. He never appointed a pope. He never appointed someone who is supposed to be, the leader of everyone else. Because he was their leader. He was their final authority, right? So I think we don't. You guys could. I'll put the description below for you guys could see it on your own. But they always say that the Roman Catholic Church is its own religion, and it is. It's totally so far gone from the original message that you hear from the scriptures and what the apostles want to establish. It's just a pagan religion masqueraded as a Christianity. And Protestant, who pride themselves to be like, no, we're not like the Catholic, they took a lot of the things. They just tweaked it a little bit. They removed the whole papacy thing, right? They remove a lot of the praying beads and a lot of things traditionally, the idols and all that, but they still kept a lot of tradition. Most pastors that are pastors today, their story is, I got a calling from God. God called me to be in this position.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Yeah.
And I've been running this church. And I got deacons under me, and God is calling me.
Mm.
And I'm doing the work.
Right.
And that line of thinking is also dangerous because it's not established. We're not establishing the church the way Christ wanted us to establish from the beginning.
Mm.
Who will be the head of the church? When the disciples asked him, who will be the elders? Who will be the leader of us? Right?
Mm.
He said, listen, that's not going to happen.
Mm.
Let him who's the greatest, who has the greatest skills, be a servant. Right?
Mm.
Andrew was extremely capable,
Mm. Wow.
small organizer. Right? He was the first. He didn't become the leader. Right? And so for someone, and you mentioned earlier that the biggest mistake that people think or do is thinking that their ability to articulate the gospel and preach the gospel is all the skill that you need to run a church.
Mm.
And that's, I would say, is one of the least, or one of the, it's important, but I would probably say top 3, top 5.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think Andrew, picked had a better office or a more important office.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because he was the one that was constantly checking Peter in
Yes.
line.
So, judges, judgments, councils, appointments of the lower leaders.
Yep.
Yep.
So, what you guys think? Make sure that you guys, like and subscribe, but more importantly, email me comments. Any documents that you guys have come across and you think it's relevant to this conversation. Let's continue researching on the history, unpacking, and I'm gonna sit down with some lawyers, man, to see can there be a class action lawsuit against the Roman Catholic Church in holding records that they deem to be theirs. They're self-proclaimed, they're self-proclaimed the leaders, right? According to them, they're the home of the truth, right? And they have all these records, and they immediately they admit, that they have records they haven't published, right? So I think that it should be a class action suit, just to have the discussion. What authority does anybody has to give themselves that authority to say, I'm going to keep historical records? Right? Because I think that even the Dead Sea Scroll was in the hand of the Roman Catholic Church for many years until they gave it to the authorities of the Jews or the Jewish people in Israel, my understanding. Okay. There was a fight back and forth who had the authority of it because the Roman Catholic Church, they believe any biblical historical discovery, it belongs to them. So we need to have, but that's a different discussion altogether. But, I enjoyed this discussion. Let me put the link in the description. Let me see if I can find this, a few comments back. Here we go. Is there. Read it for yourself. You can read all the other apostles and see where you lying with them. Maybe you may resonate with an apostle you that wasn't really looking into as much, right? Because you got Paul, Peter, John. These are the most mentioned in the Bible, or and so for someone. And maybe the reason why you don't hear a lot of the other apostles is because it wasn't their work to run churches. It wasn't their work to be bishop of a church and teach and being in the front line. They probably had other ideas and other offices, maybe dealing with business or dealing with people or politics in a way to make sure that the church is not being prosecuted or whatever. Build a relationship with the powers that be. Who knows? I'm exploring the space on how can we really build an ironclad church, if you will, or organization. Of course, Man Going God's Way is not a church, but I'm going to take these principles and learn from these principles, right? And that's why I'm looking for a few good men. They're looking to go God's way. Who's coming with us? I appreciate you, Brother Amwan, that you
Yes, sir.
saw the vision very early on. You saw the potential, right? And I'm glad I'm taking this journey with you. And also, Brother Ahmad, I know he's in the hospital dealing with some issues with his family, and everything's fine. I'm gonna give him a call later. Let's pray for that brother and his family. Make sure everything's fine. Let's pray for all the elect. Let's pray for the Church of Christ, this church, for the Jews and Gentiles alike that seeking God's name. And yeah, let's finish this thing. And if you guys, any man who is interested in men going God's way, the description is below. Send us an email. We'll talk, and then we'll definitely build together. And if we're a good fit, you could come, among us and get to know what we're all about. Any last words, brother, you want to add before we end the show?
Shalom. No, sir.
Shalom, peace and blessings. We'll be back. We're going to be back hopefully on next Tuesday. We'll be able to. I got some ideas for the show. Stay tuned for that. But there's a lot going on politically. And 2024 is going to be an interesting year. Are we even going to have an election? How things are going? We don't know. But we'll discuss that. But we all know we all voted for Christ a long time ago when we got baptized. So he's our king, our president, our leader, general, our path to the Father, right? So we know we already voted for him. But let's have a discussion and what we're going to what my prediction. I'm not a prophet, but my assessment of what we're going to be seeing in the future. So until the next time, and the Most High keep you and watch you, and shalom.
Shalom.